I watched the ER doctor's face go pale as he studied my x-ray. His hands were shaking when he picked up the phone and dialed 911. "This wasn't an accident," he said, his voice deadly serious. "Someone meant to hurt you." 24 hours earlier, I was blowing out candles at my 36th birthday party when my parents and sister decided to play what they called a harmless prank. They slammed an entire cake into my face with such force that I lost my balance and crashed to the floor. While I lay there dazed and bleeding, they laughed. My sister filmed it all, posting the video online with the caption, "Finally something interesting about Grace." But that doctor saw something in my x-ray that turned a family joke into a criminal investigation. Something that revealed this wasn't just a prank gone wrong, it was evidence of a pattern they'd been hiding for 36 years. What started as the worst birthday of my life became the day I finally fought back. And when I dug into my family's secrets, I discovered they weren't just cruel, they were criminals. They'd been stealing from me for years. My golden child sister had a hidden addiction funded by my identity. And my parents had been plotting something far worse than I ever imagined. This is the story of how I went from the invisible daughter to the woman who destroyed my entire family's lives legally, financially, and socially. They wanted to humiliate me. I gave them consequences they'll never escape. Stick with me because the revenge gets so much sweeter than you can imagine. My name is Grace Coleman. I'm 36 years old, and I've spent the last 12 years building a successful career as a financial consultant in Colorado, a fact that exactly no one in my family knows or cares about. I suppose that sounds bitter. Maybe it is. But it's also just the truth. I learned a long time ago to keep my professional life separate from my family. Not because I'm secretive by nature, but because sharing my accomplishments with them felt like throwing precious stones into a well that had no bottom. My achievements would disappear into that darkness without even an echo of acknowledgement. So I stopped throwing. I kept my success to myself, and in doing so, I found something I'd never had before, a part of my life that was entirely mine. At the office, I'm respected. My colleagues seek my advice on complex financial strategies. Clients trust me with their futures. I've built a reputation on competence, discretion, and an ability to see patterns that others miss. Last year, I was promoted to senior consultant, and my boss told me I was the best analyst he'd ever worked with. I smiled, thanked him, and went home to an empty apartment where nobody would ask about my day. My family doesn't know about the promotion. They don't know about any of it. They've never asked what I do for a living beyond the vague understanding that I work with numbers. They've certainly never asked if I'm good at it, if I'm happy, or if I've achieved anything worth celebrating. To them, I'm just Grace, reliable, boring, forgettable Grace. The daughter who always answers when they call, who always helps when they need something, who never causes drama or demands attention. My sister Victoria, on the other hand, is a different story entirely. Victoria is 29, and she's what my parents lovingly call a free spirit. What that actually means is that she's never held a job for more than 6 months, relies on our parents for rent money, and makes impulsive decisions that somehow always require family intervention to fix. But none of that matters to my parents. Victoria is fascinating. Victoria is vivacious. Victoria is their pride and joy. I remember when I graduated summa cum laude from college with a degree in finance. My parents attended the ceremony, but they spent the entire time on their phones dealing with some crisis Victoria had created at her apartment. I don't even remember what it was now, something about a landlord dispute or a broken lease. They left immediately after my name was called, barely pausing to take a single photo. 2 weeks later, Victoria got a small part in a local theater production, and my parents threw her a celebration dinner inviting half the neighborhood. They gave speeches about her talent and potential. They cried proud tears. I wasn't invited. I found out about it from a cousin who posted photos on social media. That's when I started building my wall. Not out of anger, or at least not only out of anger, but out of pure self-preservation. I realized that waiting for my parents to see me, to value me, to treat me like I mattered, was slowly killing something inside me. So I stopped waiting. I built a life they couldn't touch, couldn't diminish, couldn't take from me. But here's the thing about walls built for protection: they work both ways. They keep pain out, but they also trap things in. And over the years, every dismissal, every overlooked achievement, every family gathering where I sat silent while everyone celebrated Victoria's latest mediocre accomplishment, all of it accumulated. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I'd moved past needing their approval. I even believed it most days. But deep down, in a place I rarely let myself examine, there was something burning. A hot coal of rage and hurt that never quite went out no matter how much I ignored it. I'd learned to live with it the way you learn to live with chronic pain. You adapt, you function, you pretend it's not there. Everyone thought I was passive, weak even, the peacekeeper, the one who never made waves. My extended family had learned not to bother asking me about myself at gatherings they knew. I'd just smile and deflect, turning the conversation back to Victoria or anyone else. It was easier that way, less painful than watching their eyes glaze over when I tried to share anything about my life. My mother once told a friend within my hearing that I was the easy child. She meant it as a compliment, I think. She was explaining how grateful she was that I didn't require the constant attention and intervention that Victoria did. "Grace just handles everything herself," she said with a little laugh. "Sometimes I forget to check in with her because she's so independent." What she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that my independence wasn't a personality trait. It was a survival strategy. I'd learned that asking for help meant being told I was overreacting or being difficult. I'd learned that sharing my problems meant having them minimized or ignored while someone redirected the conversation to Victoria's more urgent needs. So I stopped asking. I stopped sharing. I became exactly what they wanted, someone who required nothing, demanded nothing, and therefore deserved nothing. 3 decades. That's how long I'd been perfecting this role. 36 years of being the background character in my own family's story. 36 years of swallowing hurt, of making myself smaller, of convincing myself that keeping the peace was more important than keeping my dignity. I thought I could do it forever. I thought the fire inside me would just keep smoldering quietly, never quite catching, never quite burning out. I'd built such a careful, controlled life around it. But I was wrong. And that fire would ignite on the night of my 36th birthday. The invitation to my 36th birthday party came from my mother, and I should have known something was off when she insisted on hosting it at their house. I hadn't had a family birthday celebration in years. I'd learned to prefer quiet dinners with a friend or two where I didn't have to compete for acknowledgement. But Mom had been unusually insistent, claiming they wanted to make up for lost time and celebrate this milestone properly. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I arrived at my parents' house that Saturday evening to find it already full of people. Not my people, though. My parents' friends from their social club, a few neighbors, some cousins I barely knew. Victoria was there, of course, positioned near the entrance like a hostess wearing a dress that was far too glamorous for someone who wasn't the guest of honor. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked comfortable, which I recognized as her way of saying my outfit wasn't impressive enough. The first hour passed in a blur of polite conversations where I was asked the same surface-level questions over and over. How's work? Fine. Still living in that same apartment? Yes. Seeing anyone special? No. The conversations never went deeper than that. Nobody asked what kind of work I did or why I loved where I lived or whether I was happy. They were checking boxes, fulfilling social obligations, waiting for something more interesting to happen. That something turned out to be Victoria's announcement. About 40 minutes into my own birthday party, my sister clinked her glass and asked for everyone's attention. My mother beamed at her, and I felt that familiar sinking sensation in my stomach. Victoria announced that she'd been accepted into a prestigious social media influencer training program. The room erupted in applause. My father raised his glass in a toast to Victoria's entrepreneurial spirit and her bright future in the digital age. People crowded around her asking questions, offering congratulations, telling her how proud they must be. I stood at the edge of the room holding a glass of wine, watching my birthday party transform into Victoria's celebration. My mother kept saying things like, "Isn't this wonderful? Both our daughters doing so well." But when people asked her about me, she gave vague responses. "Grace has a nice job with numbers," she'd say, or, "Grace is very responsible." Nothing specific, nothing that suggested pride or knowledge of my actual life. When it was finally time for cake, I felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Surely this part at least would be mine. The cake was beautiful, elaborate white frosting with pink roses. My mother guided me toward it, and everyone gathered around. Victoria had her phone out filming. I remember thinking that was odd, but I pushed the thought away. Maybe she just wanted to capture the moment. I leaned toward the candles, took a breath, and then everything exploded into chaos. My father's hands were the first. I felt both of them pressing into the back of my head, forcing my face down into the cake with shocking violence. But he wasn't alone. My mother's hands joined his, and Victoria pushed from the side. The force wasn't playful. It wasn't the gentle smash of a birthday prank. It was aggressive, brutal, like they were trying to drive my face through the cake and into the table beneath it. The impact was stunning. Frosting filled my nose, my mouth. I couldn't breathe. And then, before I could process what was happening, my father shoved harder, and I felt myself losing balance. My feet slipped in the frosting that had fallen to the floor. I went down hard, my hands unable to catch myself in time. My face hit the hardwood floor, and the sound my head made was sickening, a dull crack that I heard from inside my own skull. Pain exploded across my face, radiating from my nose and cheekbone. My neck snapped back from the impact, and I felt something wrench in my cervical spine. The room spun. There was a high-pitched ringing in my ears, and through it I heard laughter. Loud, genuine, delighted laughter. I lay there on my parents' floor, covered in cake-tasting blood mixed with buttercream frosting, and heard my own family laughing at me. Through the ringing, I caught fragments of Victoria's voice narrating for her phone. "Oh my God, did you see that? Finally something interesting about Grace? She totally face-planted." I tried to push myself up, but my arms were shaking. The room kept tilting. Someone, I think it was my father, said, "Come on, Grace, it was just a joke. Don't be so dramatic." My mother's voice joined in. "You're ruining the mood. It was supposed to be funny." Nobody helped me up. Nobody asked if I was okay. I heard the conversation starting up again around me, people awkwardly returning to their drinks and small talk, stepping around me like I was a piece of furniture that had fallen over. Through the forest of legs, I saw Victoria's fingers flying across her phone screen, already posting the video. I caught a glimpse of her caption before my vision blurred. "My sister's epic birthday fail. She can't even handle a little cake." I don't remember getting to the bathroom, but I remember looking in the mirror and seeing a stranger. My face was covered in white frosting and pink icing, but underneath blood was seeping from my nose and a cut on my lip. My left eye was already starting to swell. But what terrified me wasn't the visible damage. It was my expression. The woman in the mirror looked completely hollow, like something essential had been scooped out and thrown away. I could hear the party continuing without me. I could hear Victoria's laugh, bright and careless. I could hear my mother telling someone that I'd always been clumsy. I stood there dripping frosting and blood into my parents' sink and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not a sudden rage. Not dramatic resolution, just a quiet, cold realization settling into my bones like ice water. That was the moment I felt something snap inside my face, where pain was spreading like fire, and inside my soul, where 36 years of accumulated hurt finally crystallized into something sharp and unbreakable. I cleaned the blood and frosting from my face as best I could with shaking hands, then forced myself to leave the bathroom. I needed to tell someone I was hurt. Actually hurt. Not being dramatic, not overreacting, but genuinely injured. The pain in my face was intensifying, and the dizziness hadn't subsided. When I touched my cheekbone, the pressure sent a sharp lance of agony through my skull. I found my mother in the kitchen arranging leftover appetizers on serving trays. She glanced at me and frowned. Grace, you're being ridiculous. It was just a harmless prank. Everyone thought it was funny. Mom, I think something's wrong. My face really hurts and I'm dizzy. I might need to see a doctor. Her expression hardened. You're not going to ruin this party with your drama. Victoria just shared wonderful news and you're making it all about you as usual. She turned away from me, dismissing me as effectively as a door slammed in my face. I tried my father next. He was in the living room telling a story to a group of guests, his voice booming with laughter. When I touched his arm, he turned with irritation already clouding his features. Dad, I really hurt myself. I think I need help. Grace, for God's sake. His voice was low but sharp, meant only for me. You're embarrassing yourself. It was a joke. You fell because you're clumsy, not because anyone hurt you. Now either pull yourself together and rejoin the party, or go home if you can't handle a little fun. The guests were staring at us, their conversations dying. I saw pity in some eyes, but also annoyance. I was the one causing awkwardness, disrupting their pleasant evening. My father's jaw was clenched, and I recognized that look. Any further protest would be met with real anger. Victoria appeared at my elbow, phone still in hand, camera pointed at me. Are you seriously still crying about this, Grace? You're 36 years old? It was hilarious. Look, I've already got 200 likes on the video. She turned the phone toward me, showing the clip. I watched myself fall in slow motion, watched my face hit the floor. The comments were rolling in, OMG dying, and she ate floor, and that's what you get for being boring. See? Victoria said, her voice saccharine with false sympathy. Everyone thinks it's funny. You're just being sensitive because you're jealous of my influencer program. Mom told me you'd probably react like this. Something in her words, the casual cruelty, the premeditated nature of it all, made me understand with perfect, sickening clarity. They didn't care. Not just in this moment, but fundamentally. They didn't care whether I was injured or hurting or humiliated. My pain was content for Victoria's social media. My dignity was acceptable collateral for their entertainment. And any objection I raised would be reframed as jealousy drama or attention-seeking. I was 36 years old, and I was completely alone in a room full of my own family. I left without saying goodbye. Nobody tried to stop me. As I walked to my car, I heard the party volume increase behind me, liberated from my dampening presence. My hands fumbled with my keys, and it took 3 tries to unlock the door. The driver's seat felt impossibly far away, and I had to grip the door frame to lower myself into it. The drive home should have taken 20 minutes. It took almost an hour. The pain that had been sharp and localized in my parents' bathroom was spreading, radiating through my jaw and down my neck. Every streetlight that passed overhead sent a spike of agony through my temples. My vision kept blurring at the edges, and I wasn't sure if it was from the swelling around my eye or something worse. Twice I had to pull over onto the shoulder because waves of dizziness made the road swim in front of me. I sat with my hazard lights blinking, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for the world to stop tilting. During the second stop, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I had a friend, Sarah, who I'd met at a professional development seminar. We'd had coffee a few times. She was funny, the sort of person who seemed genuinely interested when she asked how you were doing. My thumb hovered over her name. But what would I say? Hi, I know we're not that close, but my family smashed a cake in my face and I think I'm hurt. Can you help me? She'd think I was crazy. Or worse, she'd be inconvenienced by my problems. The old programming ran deep. Don't burden people. Don't make yourself a problem. Handle it alone, because that's what you do. I put the phone away and kept driving. The highway stretched dark and empty before me, and I'd never felt the isolation more acutely. 36 years of being told my feelings didn't matter. My needs were inconvenient. My pain was exaggerated. It had carved out something essential inside me. I'd learned not to reach out because reaching out had only ever resulted in rejection or dismissal. So I drove alone through the darkness, hurting and dizzy and frightened, because that's what invisible daughters do. We suffer quietly so we don't disturb anyone. When I finally made it home, I stumbled to the bathroom and turned on the harsh overhead light. The woman in the mirror was a stranger. My left eye had swollen nearly shut, the skin around it already purpling. My nose was crusted with dried blood. There was a cut on my lip and another on my cheekbone. The right side of my face was swollen, distorting my features into something unrecognizable. But the physical damage wasn't what frightened me. It was my eyes. They were flat, empty, dead. I touched my swollen cheek, pressed gently, and felt nothing. Not physically, the pain was excruciating. But emotionally, there was just nothing. No tears, no anger, no shock. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where my feelings should have been. I'd heard of this before: emotional shock dissociation, the mind's way of protecting itself from overwhelming trauma. But knowing the clinical term didn't make it less terrifying. I felt like I was watching myself from a great distance, observing this injured woman through thick glass. She was hurt. She was alone. She'd been humiliated by the people who were supposed to love her, and she felt absolutely nothing. I stood there for a long time, studying my destroyed face with clinical detachment, waiting for some emotion to surface. Nothing came. Whatever mechanism inside me that generated feelings, anger, sadness, even fear, had simply switched off. I was empty, hollow. A shell going through the motions of being human. I took 2 painkillers, turned off the lights, and lay down on top of my bed, still fully dressed. Sleep felt impossible, but I closed my eyes anyway, hoping unconsciousness would offer some escape from the pain. But by dawn, the pain became impossible to ignore. I woke to pain so intense it took my breath away. Not the dull throb of the night before, but something sharp and consuming that radiated from my face through my entire skull. When I tried to sit up, the room spun violently and nausea rose in my throat. My left eye wouldn't open at all now, and when I touched my face, the swelling felt worse, hot and tight, like my skin might split. I looked at my phone. It was 6 a.m. I'd been lying there for maybe 4 hours, and every minute had made everything worse. The emotional numbness from last night was still there. But underneath it, my body was screaming that something was seriously wrong. I drove myself to the emergency room because that's what I did. I handled things alone. The morning was gray and cold, and I kept the visor down so I wouldn't have to see my reflection in the rearview mirror. The ER parking lot was nearly empty, which felt like a small mercy. I didn't want witnesses to whatever I looked like now. The triage nurse took one look at me and immediately escalated my case. Within 15 minutes, I was in an examination room, and within 30, I was being wheeled down for X-rays and a CT scan. The technicians were professional, but somber, their careful silence telling me more than words could have. Dr. Harrison was in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of steady, competent presence that probably calmed most patients. But when he came into my room after reviewing the imaging, his expression made my stomach drop. He pulled up a chair and sat down, which somehow felt more ominous than if he'd remained standing. "Ms. Coleman," he began, his voice careful and controlled. "I need to discuss your injuries with you. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" I gave him the sanitized version. Birthday party, cake prank, lost my balance, fell. It sounded so benign when I said it out loud, almost silly. Just a clumsy accident at a family gathering. Dr. Harrison pulled up images on his tablet, my X-rays, stark white bones against black background. He pointed to several areas with a stylus. "You have a fracture here along your left zygomatic arch, that's your cheekbone. You have another small fracture in your nasal bone. The soft tissue damage is extensive. And here," he moved to another image. "You have significant cervical strain. The muscles and ligaments in your neck have been traumatized." "So it's bad," I said, my voice flat. "But it'll heal, right?" "That's not what concerns me most, Ms. Coleman." He set the tablet aside and looked at me directly. "I've been an ER physician for 23 years. I've seen thousands of injuries from falls, accidents, and pranks. What I'm looking at here doesn't match your explanation." He paused, choosing his words with obvious care. The force vector analysis, the angle and severity of impact, indicates that your face was driven downward with considerable force before you fell. The pattern of injury suggests multiple impact points and sustained pressure. This isn't consistent with simply losing your balance. Something in my chest tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying this looks like assault, Miss Coleman, not an accident, deliberate violence. The words hung in the air between us. Someone was finally saying it. Someone with authority and expertise was validating what I'd been too trained to admit to myself. There's more, Dr. Harrison continued gently. During the examination, I noticed some concerning historical findings. Your nose has evidence of an old fracture that healed improperly. You have scarring on your ribs consistent with previous trauma. When I palpate certain areas, I can feel bone remodeling that suggests injuries that were never properly treated. He leaned forward slightly. Ms. Coleman Grace, how long has your family been hurting you? The question broke something in me. Not the emotional dam that was still frozen solid, but some cognitive barrier that had kept me from naming the truth. I heard myself talking words spilling out in a disconnected monotone. The stairs at 15 when Victoria pushed me and my nose broke. The time my father grabbed my arm so hard during an argument that I couldn't lift it for a week. The dozens of smaller incidents, shoves, accidental elbows, rough handling disguised as horseplay. Things I'd minimized, rationalized, explained away. Dr. Harrison took notes with clinical precision, but his eyes were compassionate. What you're describing is a pattern of family violence. It's often not recognized because it happens gradually, gets normalized, and victims are conditioned to accept it as their fault. He set his pen down. Grace, I need you to understand something clearly. What happened to you last night was not a prank. It was assault. And based on your history, it's part of an ongoing pattern of abuse. Hearing it stated so plainly, so professionally, unleashed something I hadn't expected. Tears started flowing not from pain, but from a desperate, overwhelming relief. Someone saw it. Someone believed me. Someone was telling me I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't being dramatic. The reality I'd been living was real, and it had a name. I have to tell you. Dr. Harrison continued, his voice still gentle. Colorado law requires mandatory reporting when we suspect assault or domestic violence. I've already contacted the police. An officer will be here shortly to take your statement and document your injuries. He must have seen the panic flash across my face because he quickly added, I know this feels frightening, but you need protection, and you need this documented. What happened to you is a crime, Grace. It needs to be treated as one. A police officer arrived 40 minutes later, a woman named Officer Martinez with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She photographed my injuries from multiple angles, the camera flash making me flinch. She took my statement with patience, asking clarifying questions, writing everything down. She requested copies of all my medical records, including the historical findings Dr. Harrison had documented. She treated the whole thing with a gravity I'd never experienced before. When she left, Dr. Harrison returned to check on me one more time. He sat on the edge of the examination table close enough that I could see the genuine concern in his expression. Grace, he said quietly, this wasn't an accident. Someone meant to hurt you. Officer Martinez returned to my examination room an hour later with a detective. He introduced himself as Detective James Morrison, a solid man in his 40s with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty. He shook my hand carefully, mindful of my injuries, and pulled up a chair. Ms. Coleman, Officer Martinez mentioned that your sister posted video of the incident online. Do you know if it's still accessible? I felt my stomach twist. I assume so. Victoria posts everything. Her account is public. She's trying to build a following as an influencer. Detective Morrison pulled out his tablet. What's her username? I gave it to him, and within seconds he'd found it. His jaw tightened as he watched, and Officer Martinez leaned in to view the screen with him. I couldn't see it from my angle, but I could hear it, the laughter, Victoria's narration, the sickening thud of my body hitting the floor. The detective played it 3 times each viewing, making his expression darker. "Ms. Coleman, I need you to watch this with me. I know it's difficult, but I need you to see what I'm seeing." He turned the tablet toward me. I'd experienced it as a victim, confused, hurt, overwhelmed. But watching it as evidence was entirely different. The video started with me approaching the cake, smiling nervously. Then my father's hands came into frame, both palms flat against the back of my head. The force he used was shocking even on the small screen. He wasn't playfully pushing. He was driving my face down with his full body weight behind it. My mother's hands joined his from the side, and then Victoria appeared in frame, shoving my shoulder just as I began to lose my balance. The audio was damning. As my face hit the floor, someone, I think it was my father, said clearly, "That's what you get." My mother's voice followed, "She's always been too uptight. Maybe this'll loosen her up." And Victoria's running commentary, "Finally putting boring grace in her place. This is the most exciting thing she's ever done." The laughter continued as I lay there. The camera angle showed me struggling to get up, showed the blood on my face, showed me crawling toward the edge of the frame. Nobody helped. Nobody stopped laughing. The video ended with Victoria's face filling the screen, grinning, "Best birthday prank ever. Grace totally ate it." "Do you see what I see?" Detective Morrison asked quietly. "It looks worse than I remember," I admitted. "It looks like assault," he corrected. "Your father's force alone could have caused serious injury, but all 3 of them participated. Your mother held you in position. Your sister made physical contact that contributed to your fall, and the audio—" He shook his head. "This isn't playful. This is malicious. The statements indicate intent to harm and enjoyment of your pain." Officer Martinez was scrolling through Victoria's profile. "Detective, you need to see this. She's got hundreds of posts about her sister over the years." She turned her phone to show him, then to me. I saw posts I'd never known existed, photos of me at family events with captions like, "Guess which sister got the looks and personality?" and "When your sibling is human Ambien." There were screenshots of texts where Victoria mocked me to her friends, posts about how her parents had to deal with boring Grace so they could have fun Victoria. "This establishes a clear pattern of psychological abuse and contempt," Detective Morrison said. "Combined with the assault video, we have documentation of ongoing family violence." He looked at me seriously. "Ms. Coleman, how many people do you think have seen this video?" I checked Victoria's post. My heart stopped. It says, 3,000 shares, 42,000 views. "She can't delete it now," Officer Martinez said with satisfaction. "Dozens of people have already downloaded it. It's preserved as evidence even if she tries to remove it." Detective Morrison showed me something else on his tablet. An elderly woman named Margaret Chen, someone from my parents' neighborhood, had shared Victoria's video to several community groups with a different caption. "I've watched the Coleman family for years. This poor woman has been treated like this her whole life. This is abuse, not a prank. She deserves better." The responses were overwhelming. Hundreds of comments from strangers expressing outrage, sharing their own stories of being family scapegoats, calling for accountability. Some were analyzing the video frame by frame, pointing out the excessive force, the coordinated attack, the lack of remorse. Several people had already tagged local news stations and domestic violence organizations. "Your most humiliating moment is becoming your strongest evidence," Detective Morrison said. "In domestic violence cases, we rarely get this kind of documentation. Usually it's he said, she said, and victims have a hard time proving what happened. You have video evidence with audio medical documentation of serious injury, and now you have hundreds of witnesses testifying to the severity of what they observed." He pulled up his notes. "Ms. Coleman, based on what I've seen here, I believe we have grounds to charge multiple family members. Your father for assault causing bodily injury. Your mother and sister for assault as accomplices. Potentially additional charges for conspiracy given the evidence that this was planned." Something shifted inside me as he spoke. The numbness that had protected me started to crack, and underneath it wasn't more pain. It was rage. Pure, clean, righteous anger that I'd suppressed for 36 years. They'd hurt me, mocked me, documented their own cruelty because they never imagined I'd fight back. They'd been so confident in my passivity that they'd created a perfect record of their crime. "What do I need to do?" I asked, and my voice sounded different, steadier, harder. "We'll need a formal statement at the station when you're feeling up to it. We'll continue gathering evidence. And Ms. Coleman." Detective Morrison's expression was almost proud. "We're going to make sure they're held accountable." For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. Sitting in the hospital room after Detective Morrison left waiting for discharge papers, I found memories surfacing that I'd spent decades trying to bury. The detective's words, "pattern of abuse," had unlocked something. And suddenly I was remembering things with painful clarity, seeing them not through the lens of the trained, compliant daughter, but through the eyes of someone who finally understood what had been done to her. My 10th birthday. I'd almost forgotten about it, or maybe I'd forced myself to forget. My grandmother had planned everything: a party at the park with my school friends, a cake shaped like a book because I loved reading, even a small gift she'd saved for months to buy. The invitations were already sent. And then Victoria announced she'd made the finals in some local dance competition scheduled for the same weekend. My mother sat me down and explained in that reasonable voice that made dissent seem childish that we'd have to cancel my party. Victoria's competition was important for her future. My birthday could be celebrated any time. We never rescheduled. The cake was never ordered. My grandmother cried when she found out, but my parents told her she was being overly sentimental. I spent my 10th birthday helping Victoria practice her routine in our living room, holding up scorecards and pretending to be a judge while she criticized my enthusiasm as not supportive enough. 2 years later, when I was 16, I won the Henderson Academic Excellence Scholarship, a full ride to any state university awarded to only 5 students statewide. I'd worked for years to earn it, maintaining a perfect GPA while tutoring other students and leading the math club. The awards ceremony was on a Thursday evening. My guidance counselor had specifically requested that my parents attend, telling me it was a once-in-a-lifetime achievement that your family should witness. I gave my parents the information weeks in advance. They said they'd be there. They didn't come. Victoria had cheerleading practice that same evening, regular Thursday practice. Nothing special, and my parents decided her attendance was more important than my ceremony. I sat in the auditorium in my best dress, watching other students' families taking photos and crying proud tears while the seat I'd saved remained empty. My guidance counselor noticed. She hugged me afterward and told me I should be proud of myself. I smiled and said my parents had a conflict they couldn't avoid. I never mentioned the scholarship at home. Nobody asked about it. The certificate sat in my desk drawer for years, looking at it only when I needed to remember that I was capable of something worthwhile. But the memory that burned brightest, the one that made my current injuries feel like an echo of the past, happened when I was 15. Victoria and I had been arguing in the upstairs hallway. I can't even remember what about now, probably something trivial. She was always starting fights, dramatic explosions over borrowed clothes or perceived slights. This time we were near the top of the basement stairs. She shoved me hard, both hands against my chest. I remember the moment of weightlessness before I fell backward, my hands grasping at empty air. I tumbled down 14 wooden steps, my body hitting each one with sickening force. When I landed at the bottom, I couldn't breathe. Blood was pouring from my nose and the pain in my ribs was excruciating. Victoria screamed for our parents, but when they came running, she'd already crafted her story. Grace lost her balance. She just fell. I tried to grab her, but I couldn't reach her in time. My parents believed her instantly. Or maybe they chose to believe her because the truth would have been inconvenient. My nose was clearly broken, swollen, grotesquely bleeding heavily, already turning purple. I could barely breathe through it. I begged them to take me to the hospital. My father refused. If we show up at the ER with injuries like this, they'll ask questions. They might call social services. Do you want Victoria to get in trouble at school because you were clumsy? My mother packed ice in a towel and handed me some ibuprofen. She told me to stop being dramatic, that it wasn't that bad, that I was making Victoria feel guilty over an accident. I spent 3 days unable to breathe through my nose, sleeping sitting up, because lying down made the pain unbearable. When the swelling finally went down, my nose was crooked. It stayed that way. For 21 years, I lived with that injury, with the breathing problems it caused, with the visible reminder that my physical well-being was worth less than Victoria's reputation. Until Dr. Harrison looked at my x-rays and identified it for what it was, evidence of untreated trauma. That wasn't the only time I'd sacrificed for Victoria. When she wrecked my parents' car in a parking lot during her senior year, the insurance deductible and increased premiums came from my college fund. I'd saved for 4 years working part-time jobs, only to watch that money disappear to cover her carelessness. When Victoria failed 3 classes in community college, I was blamed for not tutoring her enough despite having my own university courses to manage. When she needed rent money, gas money, grocery money, it was always me they called. And I gave it every time because that's what good daughters did. That's what useful daughters did. I'd been the family's emotional shock absorber, the convenient scapegoat, the shadow that existed only to make Victoria's light seem brighter. Every narrative was constructed to position her as the one who needed support, and me as the one who should provide it without complaint. The manipulation was so thorough, so complete, that I'd internalized it. I believed I was supposed to disappear for them. But sitting in that hospital room, finally seeing the truth of what had been done to me, I understood something fundamental. Pain, when buried long enough, becomes a blade. The hospital discharged me with prescriptions for pain medication, instructions for follow-up appointments, and a folder containing copies of all my medical records, evidence Detective Morrison had called it. I drove home in the afternoon light, my face throbbing, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. Something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman with documentation, with witnesses, with proof. I needed help. Not the kind of help I'd spent my life being too afraid to ask for, but professional help. Legal help. I needed someone who understood that what had happened to me wasn't just a family squabble, but a crime. And I knew exactly who to call. Elena Rodriguez had worked in financial consulting at the same firm where I'd started my career. She'd been brilliant, sharp-minded, with an almost frightening ability to identify patterns in complex data. We'd collaborated on several projects, and I'd always respected her analytical approach. But 3 years ago, Elena had left the corporate world to attend law school, and she'd recently opened her own practice specializing in civil rights and family abuse cases. I'd followed her career from a distance, reading about her work in local legal journals, impressed, but never imagining I'd need her services. I called her office Monday morning, my voice still hoarse from pain and exhaustion. Her paralegal put me through immediately when I mentioned my name. Grace Coleman. Elena's voice came through warm with recognition. I've been following your career. Last I heard, you made senior consultant. How are you? I need a lawyer, I said, and the words came out steadier than I expected. My family assaulted me at my birthday party, and I need someone who can help me make sure they're held accountable. There was a pause, then her voice shifted to pure professional focus. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Bring any documentation you have, medical records, photos, anything related to the incident, or your family history. 3 hours later, I sat in Elena's conference room, the medical folder spread between us, along with my phone tablet and a notebook, where I'd started listing incidents I could remember. Elena listened with the same intense concentration I remembered from our consulting days, but now it was directed at my life, my pain, my truth. Grace, what you're describing constitutes multiple actionable offenses, she said after I'd finished explaining. Criminal assault causing bodily injury that's being handled by the state through Detective Morrison. But you also have grounds for civil litigation assault and battery intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially a pattern of abuse spanning decades. The medical evidence alone is compelling, but if we can document the historical pattern, we build a case that shows this wasn't isolated, but systematic. I want to pursue everything, I said. Criminal, civil, all of it. Elena studied me carefully. You understand this will be grueling, It'll take months, maybe over a year. Your family will fight back. They'll try to paint you as vindictive, dramatic, money-hungry. They'll air private family matters in court. And Grace, there's no reconciliation after this. Once you file civil suits, that relationship is permanently destroyed. Good, I said and meant it. They destroyed me for 36 years. I'm just making it official. Something flickered in Elena's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. Then let's build your case properly. I need you to gather everything: text messages, emails, financial records, social media posts, photographs, medical records beyond the current injury. Anything that documents how they've treated you or exploited you. Can you do that? I spent the next week systematically excavating my own life. I went through 7 years of text message history, screenshotting every casual cruelty from Victoria, every dismissive message from my parents, every request for money, followed by silence when I needed support. I downloaded my entire email archive and searched for keywords: help Victoria, family emergency, just this once. The patterns were staggering. In 5 years, I'd given my family over $30,000 in loans that were never repaid or even acknowledged. I scrolled through Victoria's social media going back years, saving posts where she mocked me, where she positioned herself as superior, where she reduced me to a punchline. There were dozens. I'd somehow trained myself not to see them, or maybe I'd seen them and simply accepted that this was how she viewed me. Now, looking through Elena's eyes, I saw them as evidence of sustained psychological abuse. I found old photos on my computer pictures from family events where I was literally cropped out or positioned at the edge of frames. Receipts for expenses I'd covered for Victoria. Bank statements showing regular transfers to my parents' account. Medical bills from the few times I'd sought treatment for accidents that I now recognized as injuries from family violence. Elena was right. I'd been unconsciously preserving evidence my entire life. Every saved email, every screenshot, every careful record I'd kept was my subconscious building an escape route, waiting for the day I'd be strong enough to use it. When I brought everything to Elena's office the following week, she spent 2 hours reviewing it in silence. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression that was equal parts professional assessment and personal anger. Grace, this is one of the most comprehensively documented abuse cases I've ever seen. We have everything: financial exploitation, emotional abuse, medical evidence, video documentation, witness statements, and a pattern spanning decades. Your family didn't just hurt you, they created a paper trail of how they hurt you. So we can win. We can destroy them, Elena said bluntly. Legally, financially, socially. But I need to know you're ready for that. Once we file, there's no going back. I thought about 36 years of being invisible. I thought about my grandmother's carefully planned birthday party that was canceled. I thought about my broken nose healing crooked because my parents cared more about Victoria's reputation than my health. I thought about the cake smashing into my face while my own family laughed. They wanted a joke, I said quietly. I was about to give them a punchline they'd never forget. Elena moved with the speed and precision of someone who'd done this many times before. Within 2 weeks of our initial meeting, she'd prepared a comprehensive legal package that made my breath catch when I read it. The criminal complaints went through the district attorney's office, but Elena also filed civil suits in my name against all 3 family members individually and collectively. The documents were clinical, methodical, devastating. They laid out 36 years of abuse in numbered paragraphs, each incident documented with dates, medical records, where they existed, witness statements, and evidence. The birthday assault was described in technical language that somehow made it more horrifying: deliberate application of excessive force resulting in facial fractures, soft tissue damage, and cervical trauma. The financial exploitation was quantified: approximately $75,000 extracted through manipulation, coercion, and identity theft over a 10-year period. Even the emotional abuse was cataloged with the precision of a forensic accountant noting discrepancies. The strength of this filing, Elena explained as we reviewed everything one final time, is that we're not asking anyone to take your word for it. Everything is documented. The video alone is damning, but combined with medical evidence, financial records, and Victoria's own social media history of degrading you, any reasonable person will see exactly what happened. The court summons were delivered on a Tuesday morning. I know because Victoria started calling me at 10:15 and she didn't stop for 3 hours. My phone lit up with 17 calls, 23 text messages, and even a voicemail where she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. I didn't answer any of it. Elena had been crystal clear. All communication goes through me. They don't get to manipulate you directly anymore. That simple boundary one I'd never successfully maintained in my entire life felt like putting on armor. The texts started desperate. "Grace, please call me, we need to talk about this." Then they became accusatory. "I can't believe you're doing this to your own family." Then returned to pleading, "Please, I'm begging you, just talk to me for 5 minutes." I watched them come in, felt nothing, and forwarded them all to Elena, who added them to our evidence file documenting the family's attempts at manipulation. My mother called from a blocked number that evening. I answered without thinking and immediately regretted it. "Grace, what have you done?" Her voice was shrill with panic. "Do you understand what you're doing to this family? Your father is beside himself. Victoria is having panic attacks. How could you be so vindictive?" "All communication needs to go through my attorney, Elena Rodriguez," I said, my voice flat. "Her number is on the legal documents you received. Your attorney, Grace, we're your family. We don't need attorneys between us." "Yes," I said simply, "we do," and I hung up. The next day, Victoria tried a different approach. She showed up at my apartment building, buzzing my unit repeatedly, until I finally picked up the intercom. "Grace, please, I need to talk to you face to face. I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "You meant to hurt me," I said through the intercom. "You filmed it. You posted it. You laughed while I bled on the floor. The only thing you didn't mean was for there to be consequences. It was Mom and Dad's idea. They're the ones who pushed you so hard, I just went along with it." There it was, the same pattern that had played out our entire lives. Victoria deflecting responsibility, positioning herself as the innocent party swept up in circumstances beyond her control. But this time, I had no interest in absolving her. "You're 29 years old, Victoria. You made your choices. Now live with them." I disconnected the intercom and watched from my window as she stood outside for another 20 minutes looking up at my building before finally leaving. The old Grace would have gone down to her, would have comforted her, reassured her, probably even apologized for making things difficult. The new Grace understood that her sister's tears were not her responsibility. Elena called that afternoon with news. "Victoria's been trying to delete things from her social media. Her Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, she's been scrubbing posts, particularly the ones mocking you. Unfortunately for her, our forensic specialist already archived everything, and the police have it as evidence. I've notified the detective and the prosecutor. Deleting evidence could be construed as obstruction." "Will that make things worse for her?" "It won't help her case," Elena said with satisfaction. "It shows consciousness of guilt. She knows what she did was wrong and she's trying to hide it." The video continued its trajectory through the internet, picking up momentum in ways I hadn't anticipated. A local news station did a segment on Family Violence Awareness Month, using my case as an example, though they didn't name me directly. The reporter described a Colorado woman assaulted by her own family at a birthday celebration, and discussed how emotional abuse often escalates to physical violence. They interviewed a psychologist about family scapegoating dynamics, and I watched in strange detachment as she described my exact life without knowing me. My employer, Thornton Financial Group, released a statement I hadn't requested but deeply appreciated. "We stand behind our colleagues when they face difficult personal situations. Ms. Coleman has our full support as she pursues justice." Several co-workers reached out privately, some sharing their own stories of family estrangement, others simply offering support. My boss, Richard, called me personally. "Take whatever time you need, Grace. When you're ready to come back, your position is waiting. And for what it's worth, I always thought you were stronger than you let on." Now I know I was right. The shift in how people saw me was disorienting. I'd spent my entire life being invisible, and suddenly people were seeing me, really seeing me. But they weren't seeing a victim. They were seeing someone who'd stood up, who'd fought back, who'd refused to accept mistreatment anymore. My family, meanwhile, was experiencing the opposite transformation. My parents' friends from the social club were notably absent from their recent gatherings. Invitations to neighborhood events stopped arriving. My mother, who volunteered at the local library, found her shifts quietly reassigned. My father, who'd been on the planning commission for 15 years, received a formal letter suggesting he consider stepping down given the personal circumstances requiring his attention. Margaret Chen, the elderly neighbor who'd reshared Victoria's video with outrage, later sent me a note through Elena's office. "I've lived next to your parents for 12 years and I've watched how they treated you. I'm sorry I never said anything before, but I'm saying it now. You deserved better, and I'm glad you're finally demanding it." The whispers followed my family everywhere. I knew because people told me. Former friends reported conversations they'd overheard at the grocery store, the gym, church. Can you believe they did that to their own daughter? I always thought something was off about that family. Poor Grace having to grow up like that. The carefully constructed social reputation my parents had spent decades building was crumbling, and for the first time in my life, people were listening to my truth instead of their fiction. But that was only the beginning of their downfall. Elena's civil case required financial discovery, which meant my parents and Victoria had to provide comprehensive documentation of their finances. They fought it, of course. Their attorney filed motion after motion attempting to limit the scope, claiming financial records were irrelevant to an assault case. But Elena argued successfully that establishing a pattern of exploitation was central to proving intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the judge agreed. When the boxes of financial documents arrived at Elena's office, she brought in Marcus Way, a forensic accountant she'd worked with on previous cases. I met with them on a gray Tuesday afternoon, expecting to review evidence of the money I'd loaned my family over the years. What Marcus found was so much worse. "Grace, I need you to look at something," Marcus said, his expression troubled. He slid a printout across the conference table. "This is a credit card application from 4 years ago. Capital One Visa, $15,000 limit. Do you recognize this?" I studied the document. My name, my social security number, my birth date. But the address listed was my parents' house, not my apartment. I never applied for this card. "Look at the signature." I looked. It was meant to be my signature, but it was wrong. The capital G was too elaborate, the loops in the double E too rounded. "That's not how I sign my name." "That's what I thought." Marcus pulled out more documents. "Here's another one. Discover card 3 years ago, 12,000 limit. Same story, your information, their address, forged signature. And here's a personal loan from a credit union opened in your name 2 years ago for $10,000. The funds were deposited into an account that your mother has signing authority over." Elena was watching my face carefully. "Grace, did you know about any of these accounts?" "No, I check my credit report annually. How is this not showing up?" "Because someone's been making minimum payments," Marcus explained. "Not from your accounts from your parents. They've been managing these, carefully keeping balances below reporting thresholds that would trigger alerts to you. The total across all 3 accounts is approximately $28,000 in debt that you didn't create, but are legally responsible for." I felt cold spreading through my chest. "What did they spend it on?" Marcus flipped through transaction records. "Luxury purchases, jewelry, electronics, vacation packages. This Discover card has multiple charges from online gambling sites. The personal loan was used to pay off credit card debt that Victoria had accumulated." He looked up at me. "Grace, this wasn't emergency spending. This was systematic exploitation of your excellent credit for their discretionary spending. Can we prove I didn't authorize this?" Elena nodded. "Forensic handwriting analysis will confirm the signatures are forgeries. The fact that all statements went to their address rather than yours demonstrates concealment. And Grace, there's more." She pulled out a different folder. Marcus also reviewed their financial situation to assess their ability to pay damages in our civil suit. What he found is illuminating. Marcus opened a spreadsheet on his laptop, turning it so I could see. Your parents own their home outright. Paid off the mortgage 8 years ago. They have retirement accounts totaling approximately $320,000. Your father's business generates about $90,000 in annual income, and your mother has a pension from her years teaching. They take at least 2 vacations a year, own 2 newer model cars, and maintain country club memberships. I stared at the numbers, not comprehending. But they're always asking me for money. They say they're struggling to make ends meet. They're not, Marcus said bluntly. They're actually quite comfortable financially. But over the past 10 years, according to your bank records, you've given them approximately $47,000 in documented transfers and loans. That doesn't include cash you've given them or expenses you've paid directly. Elena added, combined with the $28,000 in fraudulent accounts, your family has extracted $75,000 from you through a combination of identity theft and emotional manipulation. The room felt too small suddenly. I thought of all the times my mother had called crying about the electric bill, the mortgage payment, the car repair. My father's grave voice explaining they might lose the house if they couldn't cover property taxes. Victoria's desperate texts about being evicted if she couldn't make rent. Every story designed to trigger my guilt, my sense of family obligation, my terror of being the daughter who abandoned her struggling family. All of it was lies. They were never struggling, I said slowly, the realization settling like lead in my stomach. They created an entire fiction to exploit me. Yes, Elena confirmed. And that fiction constitutes fraud. The forged credit applications are federal crimes, identity theft, bank fraud. Each count carries potential prison time. Marcus pulled up another screen. There's one more thing. I found some irregularities in your parents' tax returns that warrant investigation. Unreported income from your father's business, suspicious deductions and indications. They may have used your identity for more than just credit cards. Elena's expression was fierce. Grace, I'm going to report this to federal authorities. The identity theft and bank fraud are federal crimes that the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office will investigate. I'm also going to ensure the IRS receives information about potential tax fraud. This goes far beyond state assault charges. Will this make things worse for them? I asked. Much worse, Elena said. Federal investigations are thorough and slow. They have resources state prosecutors don't, and federal conviction rates are extremely high, over 95%. If the U.S. Attorney decides to prosecute your family, will face serious consequences. Prison time is possible for your parents. Victoria, depending on her involvement, could face charges as an accessory. I thought about 36 years of being told I was selfish for wanting boundaries, dramatic for expressing hurt, ungrateful for not giving more. I thought about every guilt trip, every manufactured crisis, every tearful phone call designed to extract money from me. They hadn't just hurt me physically and emotionally. They'd been systematically robbing me for years, using my love and loyalty as weapons against me. Do it, I said. Report everything. Elena made the calls that afternoon. Federal authorities were contacted. Evidence was transmitted. The machinery of federal investigation began its slow, inexorable process. My family had thought they were dealing with a local assault case that might go away with the right pressure or apology. They had no idea they'd just attracted the attention of agencies that never let go once they identified fraud. I drove home that evening with documents secured in my briefcase, evidence of years of calculated exploitation. Each forged signature, each manipulative text, each fraudulent account was proof that their cruelty wasn't emotional or impulsive. It was premeditated, systematic, and criminal. And every secret I uncovered sharpened the blade. I didn't seek publicity. I didn't share my story beyond what was legally necessary. But the video Victoria posted had taken on a life of its own, spreading through corners of the internet I'd never explored. Elena's office started receiving media requests daily, and my email inbox filled with messages from strangers who'd seen the clip and wanted to share their own stories. The video found its audience in unexpected places. Online communities dedicated to family estrangement groups with names like Raised by Narcissists and Adult Children of Toxic Families shared it repeatedly. I created an anonymous account just to observe the discussions and was stunned by what I found. Thousands of comments from women, many in their 50s and 60s, saying variations of, "This was my childhood. I could have been the one on that floor. My family did this to me for 40 years. Then the TikTok creators found it. I didn't understand TikTok, but apparently several popular accounts that discussed family dynamics and psychology began posting reaction videos. Elena showed me one from a licensed therapist with over 2 million followers. She broke down the video frame by frame, pointing out the coordinated nature of the attack, the lack of concern when I felt the immediate shift to mockery rather than help. "This is textbook scapegoat abuse," she explained to her massive audience. "Notice how the family shows no remorse, no concern for her welfare. They're entertained by her pain. That's not a prank, that's cruelty." Her video alone generated over 5 million views and 30,000 comments. Many were from people tagging family members saying things like, "Mom, this is what you did to Sarah," or "This is why I don't come to family events anymore." The video became a cultural touchpoint, a reference for discussing dynamics that had previously lived only in therapy sessions and support groups. A journalist from an online publication that focused on women's issues reached out through Elena asking if I'd be willing to do an interview. I declined, not ready to put my name and face publicly to the story. But the journalist wrote an article anyway, using the publicly available information and the video itself. The headline read, "The Birthday Assault That Exposed America's Family Abuse Epidemic." The piece examined how emotional and psychological abuse within families is often invisible until it escalates to physical violence, using my case as the central example without identifying me directly. 2 weeks later, Elena forwarded an email from the National Coalition Against Family Violence. They were hosting their annual awareness conference and wanted to invite me as a featured speaker. "Your story has resonated with thousands of survivors," the director wrote. "Your willingness to pursue legal accountability sends a powerful message. Would you consider sharing your experience at our November conference?" I read the invitation 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Part of me was terrified at the idea of public speaking, of standing in front of hundreds of people and being vulnerable. But another part, I was just beginning to recognize, felt validated in a way I'd never experienced. My private pain, my family's secret cruelty was being recognized on a national scale as exactly what it was: abuse. I declined the speaking invitation, but asked if they had resources for survivors in my area. The director responded within hours, providing information for support groups, therapy referrals, and legal assistance networks. "We're here whenever you're ready," she wrote. "You're not alone." I started attending a Thursday evening support group at a community center in Boulder, about 40 minutes from my apartment. The group was specifically for adult children of dysfunctional families, and the first night I walked in, I nearly turned around and left. 12 people sat in a circle ranging in age from late 20s to early 70s, and I was convinced my story wouldn't fit, that I'd be told I was overreacting, just like my family had always claimed. Instead, I found my people. The first woman who shared talked about being the invisible daughter always overlooked in favor of her charismatic brother. Another man described financial exploitation by his parents that spanned decades. A woman in her 60s cried as she explained that she'd only recently understood that what happened to her wasn't normal family dysfunction, but abuse. Each story was different in specifics, but identical in patterned scapegoating, gaslighting, exploitation, and the crushing weight of being told that speaking up made you the problem. When it was my turn, I told my story in halting sentences, expecting judgment or skepticism. Instead, I saw recognition in every face. When I finished, a woman named Patricia, who was probably in her late 60s, reached across the circle and squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy," she said. "You're not dramatic. You're a survivor and you're finally fighting back. I'm proud of you." I cried in that community center surrounded by strangers who understood me better than my own family ever had. Meanwhile, my family was discovering that actions documented online have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment. My father's name started appearing in local news articles about the case. His business partners received calls asking if they were aware of the assault charges and federal investigation into financial fraud. Several longtime clients quietly moved their accounts to other consultants. My mother's carefully cultivated social network evaporated. The church ladies who used to call her for committee meetings stopped reaching out. Her book club asked her to take a break while she dealt with personal matters. The volunteer coordinator at the library where she'd worked for 12 years called to say they were restructuring volunteer assignments, and her services were no longer needed. Victoria lost 2 modeling contracts when brands discovered the video and the associated criminal charges. One company issued a public statement about not working with individuals under investigation for violent crimes. Her Instagram followers, which she'd been desperately trying to build, began dropping as people realized she was that sister from the assault video. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard my family was turning on each other. My parents blamed Victoria for posting the video in the first place. Victoria blamed them for the excessive force that made it look so bad. My mother blamed my father for his business dealings that brought federal attention. My father blamed everyone for not controlling me better when they had the chance. The unified front they'd maintained for 36 years, always aligned against me, was fracturing under pressure. They'd spent decades positioning themselves as the normal ones, and me as the problem. Now the world was telling a different story, and they couldn't manipulate the narrative anymore. Elena called me on a Wednesday morning, her voice carrying an edge of satisfaction I'd come to recognize. "Grace, your father just received a letter from the IRS. They're opening a formal investigation into his tax returns and business finances for the past 7 years." Then came the first letter from the IRS. The IRS letter arrived at my parents' house on a Thursday afternoon. I know the exact day and time because my mother called me 17 times in the span of 2 hours, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. I didn't answer. Elena had been clear, no direct contact. But I listened to the messages later, and in them I heard something I'd never heard before in my mother's voice, genuine fear. "Grace, please call me back. Your father received a letter from the IRS. They're investigating him. Us. This is serious. We need to talk to you about this. Please." Elena received a copy of the IRS letter through official channels the following day. She called me into her office to review it, and I sat across from her desk while she read portions aloud. The language was bureaucratic but unmistakable in its severity. "The Internal Revenue Service has identified discrepancies in your tax filings for the years 2018 through 2024 that warrant comprehensive investigation," Elena read. Areas of concern include unreported income from business operations, fraudulent deduction claims, and potential identity theft involving family members' personal information for purposes of concealing assets and liabilities. You are required to provide complete financial documentation, including but not limited to business records, personal and business bank statements, credit card statements, loan applications, property records, and any accounts opened under names other than your own. Elena set the letter down and looked at me. "Grace, this is an extremely serious investigation. The IRS doesn't send letters like this unless they already have substantial evidence. Someone reviewed your family's finances and found enough red flags to justify a full forensic audit. How long does this take?" "IRS investigations minimum of several months, more likely a year or longer. They're incredibly thorough. And here's the thing about federal investigations. They have resources and authority that state agencies don't. They can subpoena records from any financial institution. They can interview anyone connected to your father's business. They can trace every dollar through multiple accounts and years of transactions. And unlike local police who might be sympathetic to family situations, the IRS doesn't care about personal circumstances. They care about tax law violations." Over the next several weeks, I learned through Elena exactly what the IRS forensic team was uncovering. The picture that emerged was worse than even Marcus, our forensic accountant, had initially suspected. My father's business, Coleman Financial Consulting, had consistently underreported income over 5 years. The IRS traced approximately $120,000 in unreported revenue consulting fees paid in cash, side contracts, never recorded payments made to personal accounts rather than business accounts. Each instance was documented through bank records, client interviews, and cross-referencing of reported business expenses against actual revenue. The deductions were equally damning. My father had claimed $35,000 in fraudulent business expenses, personal vacations written off as business travel country club memberships, claimed as client entertainment vehicle expenses for cars used exclusively for personal purposes. The IRS had receipts, credit card statements, and location data proving the fraud. But the identity theft component was what transformed this from tax evasion into potential criminal charges. The investigation revealed that my parents had opened not 3 accounts in my name, as we'd initially discovered, but 7. Credit cards, personal loans, even a small business line of credit, all using my Social Security number and forged signatures, all with statements directed to their address. The total debt approached $45,000. The IRS also discovered that my father had misrepresented his income on loan applications to secure better terms, which constituted bank fraud. He'd inflated business revenue when applying for their home equity line of credit, providing falsified financial statements to the lender. "The evidence is overwhelming," Elena explained during one of our meetings. "Financial institutions keep records indefinitely. Your father can't claim these were mistakes or oversights. The pattern is too consistent, too calculated. This was systematic fraud, spanning years." What I didn't expect was how quickly my family would turn on each other once federal investigators started asking questions. My mother, who had always presented herself as uninvolved in financial matters, suddenly produced a folder of emails she'd saved over the years. In them, she questioned my father repeatedly about the credit cards in Grace's name and the unreported cash payments. His responses told her not to worry, that he was handling it, that she should stay out of business matters. She handed these emails over to investigators, and her attorney made it clear she was cooperating fully to minimize her own legal exposure. Victoria discovered her identity had been used too. Not as extensively as mine, one credit card $10,000 limit, but enough to make her potentially liable for debt she didn't create. Her panic was audible even in the second-hand accounts I received through Elena. Victoria hired her own attorney and immediately began distancing herself from our parents. In her statement to investigators, she claimed she'd been manipulated by them her entire life, that she was as much a victim as anyone. She threw them completely under the bus to save herself. My father tried to maintain control, but federal investigations don't respond to intimidation or manipulation tactics that might work on family members. When he refused to provide certain business records claiming they were protected by privacy laws, the IRS simply subpoenaed them directly from banks and clients. When he tried to explain away the identity theft as helping his daughters build credit, investigators pointed out that forged signatures and concealed statements constitute fraud regardless of stated intentions. I watched this implosion from a safe distance, receiving updates through Elena, but maintaining complete separation from my family. The people who'd spent 36 years demanding my loyalty, who'd insisted that family sticks together no matter what, who'd told me I was selfish for wanting boundaries, they'd abandoned any pretense of unity the moment their individual freedom was threatened. My mother was cooperating against my father. Victoria was testifying against both parents. My father was trying to shift blame to his accountant. The loyalty they'd demanded from me but never reciprocated had evaporated completely under pressure. Elena called me one evening nearly 3 months after that first IRS letter. "Grace, the U.S. Attorney's Office just contacted me. They're considering federal charges against your father: tax evasion, bank fraud, and identity theft. Each charge carries potential prison time. Your mother might face charges as an accessory, but her cooperation will likely result in probation. Victoria's being offered a plea deal because she's younger and has no prior record. What happens now?" Now the investigation continues. More evidence gets compiled. Eventually indictments may be issued. This process can take another year or more." She paused. "Grace, you started this seeking justice for an assault. What you've uncovered is a criminal enterprise that happened to be run by your family." But the financial storm had only just begun. Marcus called Elena's office requesting an emergency meeting. When I arrived, both he and Elena were waiting with expressions that told me they'd found something significant. Marcus had his laptop open, several spreadsheets displayed across the screen, each one color-coded in ways I didn't yet understand. "Grace, we need to discuss what we've uncovered about the credit accounts in your name," Marcus began. "Initially, we identified 3 accounts totaling $28,000. The deeper investigation has revealed additional accounts we weren't aware of. The total is actually $45,000 across 6 credit cards and 1 personal loan." He pulled up transaction histories, months of charges scrolling down the screen. My eyes caught on recurring entries: Bet Rivers Online Casino, DraftKings Sportsbook, FanDuel betting. The amounts were staggering, sometimes 3 or 4 charges in a single day, ranging from $200 to $1,500 each. "These accounts were used primarily for online gambling," Marcus explained. "Over 3 years, approximately $32,000 was spent on various gambling platforms. The remaining $13,000 went to luxury purchases, cash advances, and direct transfers." He highlighted several transactions. "These transfers went to an account registered under Victoria Coleman's name." Elena leaned forward. "Grace, the transaction records show that Victoria was the primary user of these accounts. The gambling sites were accessed from her devices. We have IP addresses that match her apartment and the coffee shops she frequented. The luxury purchases were shipped to her address. The cash advances were withdrawn from ATMs near her residence." "So Victoria was the one using my identity," I said slowly. "Not just my parents." "Your parents facilitated it," Marcus clarified. "They received the statements at their address, made minimum payments to avoid your notice, and essentially managed the fraud. But Victoria was the direct beneficiary. She was stealing from you to fund a gambling addiction." Elena pulled up another document. "We interviewed Victoria's ex-boyfriend, Marcus Sullivan, the one from the affair. He was willing to talk once he understood this was part of a federal investigation. He confirmed Victoria has had a severe gambling problem for at least 3 years. He said she'd lose entire paychecks betting on sports games, then call your parents crying about being unable to pay rent. He left her 6 months ago specifically because of the gambling and the constant financial chaos." "But my family told me Victoria was doing well," I said. "They said she had this successful career, that Marcus was supporting her." "She hasn't had steady employment in 18 months, Marcus said. "The influencer training program she announced at your birthday party. It's a multi-level marketing scheme that costs money to join. There was no career. The glamorous life she portrayed on social media was funded by credit cards, stolen in your name, and money from your parents' money they'd either stolen from you directly or extracted through manipulation." The realization settled over me like ice water. Every time my parents had called asking for help with Victoria's rent, every emergency where Victoria needed money for her car or her utilities or her credit card payments, it had all been a lie. They weren't helping Victoria manage temporary setbacks. They were enabling an addiction and covering up theft. "All those emergency calls," I said, "the times they said Victoria was struggling and needed help, they were actually calling because she'd gambled away thousands of dollars on my credit cards, and they needed to make minimum payments to keep me from noticing." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "Grace, you weren't just funding Victoria's lifestyle through direct loans. You were unknowingly funding a gambling addiction through identity theft." Marcus pulled up a timeline. "The pattern is clear. Victoria would run up charges on the stolen credit cards. When balances got high enough to risk you noticing, or creditors calling your parents would call you with some emergency, you'd send money. They'd use it to make payments on the fraudulent accounts. The cycle repeated for years." Elena's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression hardened. "I see. Yes, thank you for the update." She ended the call and looked at me. That was the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're formally adding Victoria to the federal charges. Identity theft, in an amount exceeding $40,000, which is a mandatory minimum sentence. Wire fraud because the gambling sites operate across state lines and involve electronic transactions. And conspiracy to commit fraud working with your parents to conceal the crimes. What does that mean for her? Federal charges are serious, Grace. The U.S. Attorney's Office has a conviction rate over 95%. They don't bring cases they can't win, and the evidence against Victoria is overwhelming. Her lawyer is already pushing for a plea deal, but given the amount involved and the duration of the fraud, prosecutors have little incentive to be generous. Elena paused. Your parents are also facing additional charges as accessories and co-conspirators. This isn't just tax evasion anymore. It's organized fraud involving multiple family members over several years. I sat back in my chair processing everything. The golden child, the beloved daughter, the one who supposedly had everything together, it had all been an illusion. Victoria's perfect life was built on lies, theft, and addiction. My parents had enabled and participated in that fraud, sacrificing me to maintain Victoria's fiction. I need you to understand something, Elena said gently. Victoria is trying to negotiate by claiming she was manipulated by your parents, that she didn't understand the severity of what she was doing. But the evidence shows otherwise. She actively used those cards. She gambled away tens of thousands of dollars, knowing it wasn't her money. She maintained the charade while watching your parents manipulate you for cash. She was a willing, active participant in defrauding you. I thought about Victoria at my birthday party laughing as I bled on the floor posting the video for entertainment. I thought about every time she'd pretended to be my friend while actively stealing my financial identity. I thought about the years of condescension, the mocking social media posts, the casual cruelty, all while she was committing federal crimes against me. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not satisfaction, but a deep, exhausted sadness. Victoria had spent 29 years being told she was special, being given everything, being protected from every consequence. And instead of becoming a functional adult, she'd become a woman with a gambling addiction facing federal charges who'd stolen from her own sister to fund her self-destruction. I didn't want this, I said quietly. I just wanted them to stop hurting me. I know, Elena said, but Grace, you didn't create these consequences. You simply refused to keep covering them up. Victoria made her choices, your parents made theirs. You just stopped being their shield. Victoria's house of cards was collapsing, and she had no one to blame but herself. The email arrived on a Tuesday evening while I was reviewing documents for Elena. The subject line was simple. About your family, from someone who understands. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another message from a stranger who'd seen the video. But something made me open it. Dear Grace, my name is Margaret Coleman. I'm your aunt, your father's younger sister. I saw your video online, and I need you to know you're not the first daughter they destroyed. I was. I know you were told I died in a car accident when you were 8 years old. I didn't. I'm very much alive, and I've been trying to reach you for 28 years. I'm attaching a photo as proof. Please, if you're willing, I'd like to meet you. You deserve to know the truth about our family. Attached was a photograph of a woman in her early 50s holding today's newspaper with the date clearly visible. She had my father's eyes, the same sharp green, but her face was softer, kinder. I stared at the photo for a long time, my mind struggling to reconcile this living, breathing woman with the dead aunt I'd mourned as a child. I remembered my Aunt Margaret's funeral. I was 8 years old, wearing a black dress my mother had bought specially for the occasion. My father had cried actual tears streaming down his face as he talked about his baby sister who'd been taken too soon. My grandmother had been devastated, barely able to speak through her grief. We'd buried an empty casket because I was told the accident had been too terrible to allow an open service. But there was no accident. There was no death. There was only a woman my family had decided to erase. I forwarded the email to Elena, then responded to Margaret with a simple message. I'd like to meet you. Please tell me when and where. We met 2 days later at a small coffee shop in Boulder, far from my parents' neighborhood. I arrived early, anxious and disoriented, feeling like my entire understanding of family history was about to be rewritten. When Margaret walked in, I recognized her immediately from the photo. She was elegant, composed with gray threading through dark hair and those unmistakable Coleman green eyes. She sat across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "You look so much like your grandmother," she said softly. "She would be proud of you for fighting back." "Why did they tell me you were dead?" Margaret's expression darkened. "Because to them, I was." "Grace, I need to tell you something about our family that you probably haven't fully understood yet. They don't tolerate independence. They don't tolerate anyone who refuses to follow the script they've written. And when someone resists, they don't just punish them, they erase them completely." She pulled out a folder she'd brought, old letters, printed emails, and documents I couldn't yet identify. "I was 17 when I told your father, my brother, that I wanted to be a teacher. He'd decided I would be a doctor. Our father had been a doctor, and your father believed the family legacy required it. When I enrolled in the education program at State University instead of pre-med, he was furious. He said I was throwing away my potential, embarrassing the family, being selfish." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she sorted through papers. "It got worse. He tried to control everything: my classes, my friends, my relationships. When I wouldn't comply, he recruited our parents to help pressure me. They cut off financial support. They told me I wasn't welcome home unless I changed my major. And when I refused, when I got a job and paid my own way through school, they did something I never thought possible." She showed me a letter, yellowed with age, written in my father's handwriting. "Margaret, you have chosen to reject this family and everything we stand for. If you continue on this path, you are no longer my sister. You are no longer a Coleman. You are nothing to us." "He sent that when I graduated with my teaching degree," Margaret said. "And he meant it. They stopped returning my calls. They moved without giving me their new address. When I tried to visit, they wouldn't answer the door. And then I started hearing from relatives that I'd died in a car accident. Your father had told everyone I'd been killed, that the family was too devastated to discuss it. He held a memorial service. He gave eulogies. He cried at my funeral." "But you weren't dead," I whispered. "No. I was teaching second grade in Denver, living my life, and according to my family, I didn't exist." She pulled out another document, a restraining order my father had filed against her. "When I tried to attend our mother's funeral, he had security remove me. He claimed I was an imposter, someone pretending to be his dead sister to cause trouble. The restraining order prevented me from contacting any family member. I tried to reach you, Grace. Over the years, I sent letters to your house. I sent emails to addresses I found online. Every attempt was intercepted. Your father made sure nothing got through to you." Margaret opened a medical file, and I saw X-rays, doctor's notes, photographs of injuries. "When I was 17, about 6 months before I told them about wanting to be a teacher, I fell down the basement stairs during an argument with your father. Sound familiar?" I felt cold wash over me. "My nose, when I was 15. "Exactly." Margaret pointed to her X-rays. "Broken nose, fractured ribs, severe bruising. Our parents refused to take me to the hospital, said it would raise questions. They treated it at home. The nose healed crooked, just like yours did." "Grace, the pattern of abuse in our family didn't start with you. It's been there for generations, targeting anyone who doesn't comply with what they've decided we should be." She produced more evidence emails between our parents discussing the Margaret situation, instructions to family members about maintaining the death story, even a newspaper obituary our father had submitted listing Margaret as deceased. The systematic erasure was documented in meticulous detail. "Why did you wait so long to contact me?" I asked. "I didn't wait. I tried for years. But after the restraining order, I was afraid if I pushed too hard, I'd make things worse for you. I didn't know if you were being hurt the same way I was. And honestly, Grace, I thought maybe you'd had a better experience. Maybe they'd learned, maybe they'd changed. Then I saw that video online, saw what they did to you on your birthday, and I realized nothing had changed. They'd just found a new target. Margaret looked at me with an expression of deep sadness mixed with fierce determination. I spent 28 years thinking I was the problem, that maybe I'd been too stubborn or ungrateful. But seeing what they did to you, understanding the federal charges they're facing, the decades of abuse and fraud, I finally understand. The problem was never us. It was always them. I wasn't the first victim. I was just the first one who fought back. Margaret's revelations left me reeling for days. I'd gained an ally, yes, but I'd also lost something fundamental, the belief that maybe my childhood memories were partly exaggerated, that perhaps things weren't as bad as I remembered. Margaret's evidence proved they were worse. The abuse in my family wasn't situational or accidental. It was systematic, generational, and deliberate. I spent the following week organizing evidence with renewed purpose, creating files for Elena that documented not just my experiences, but the broader pattern Margaret had exposed. I was working at my dining table one evening, surrounded by laptops and tablets, when I reached for an old device. I'd forgotten I owned a tablet Victoria had given me 3 years ago, claiming she'd upgraded and didn't need it anymore. I powered it on, intending to wipe it clean and donate it. The screen lit up, and I immediately saw Victoria's email was still logged in. I should have logged out immediately. But something made me pause. One of the recent messages had a subject line that caught my eye. "Missing you already, can't wait until Friday." I clicked it before I could talk myself out of it. The email was from someone named Marcus Sullivan, and the content was unmistakably romantic, intimate. The kind of messages that could only exist between people in a relationship. I scrolled through the thread, my stomach twisting as I read exchange after exchange spanning over a year. Marcus Sullivan, I realized, was the same Marcus from the affair Elena and I had already uncovered during earlier investigation, Victoria's supposedly supportive boyfriend. Except these emails revealed something we hadn't known. Marcus wasn't just Victoria's boyfriend. He was married. The emails included complaints about his wife Jessica, discussions about having to be careful about timing references to hiding charges on credit cards so his wife wouldn't notice. And in one particularly damning exchange from 6 months ago, Victoria wrote, "I know Jessica just had the baby and timing is bad, but I miss you so much. When can you come over?" Marcus had been funding Victoria's lifestyle with marital assets while his wife was pregnant with, and then caring for their newborn, and Victoria had known, had participated willingly, had complained when he needed to spend time with his actual family. I sat with the tablet in my hands, unsure what to do with this information. The criminal cases against Victoria were already severe. This felt almost petty in comparison relationship drama when federal charges were pending. But as I read more messages, I kept thinking about Jessica Sullivan, a woman who'd just had a baby, who had no idea her husband was having an affair, who was entitled to the truth about how her marital assets were being spent. I called Elena the next morning. "I found something, and I'm not sure what to do with it." I explained the situation, forwarding her several of the most damning emails. Elena was quiet for a moment after reading them. "Grace, legally this doesn't add much to our case, but ethically Jessica Sullivan deserves to know. If Marcus was using marital funds to support Victoria, Jessica has a right to that information for divorce proceedings. I don't want to hurt her more than she's already being hurt," I said, "but I also don't want to be complicit in keeping her in the dark." "What if you send it anonymously?" Elena suggested. "Just forward the email chain from an anonymous account. Let Jessica make her own decisions about what to do with the information. You're not seeking publicity or revenge, you're just ensuring another woman has the information she needs to protect herself." That felt right. I created an anonymous email account and forwarded the entire thread to Jessica Sullivan with only a brief note. "I thought you should know. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you." I included no identifying information, no context, just the emails themselves. Jessica filed for divorce 3 days later. I know because the local business community is small, and Marcus Sullivan owned a construction company that had contracts with several high-profile clients. His wife's family was prominent in the area, and when Jessica's father, a well-known local attorney, filed divorce papers citing adultery with specific evidence, people noticed. The story spread rapidly through the community. Marcus Sullivan was dropped from the Chamber of Commerce. Several clients canceled contracts not wanting to be associated with the scandal. And Victoria, who'd managed to maintain some shred of social media presence despite everything else, found herself at the center of another public controversy. The comments on her posts were brutal. Married women who'd previously followed her for fashion content now flooded her photos with accusations. "You knew he had a newborn baby. This is who you really are, a homewrecker and a thief. I hope the money was worth destroying a family." Even people who didn't know about the criminal charges were disgusted by the affair, particularly the timing. Her remaining modeling contracts evaporated within a week. The brands she'd been desperately trying to work with wanted nothing to do with someone now publicly known for breaking up a marriage. Her Instagram followers, which she'd tried so hard to build, dropped by thousands as people unfollowed in disgust. Marcus Sullivan abandoned her immediately. According to mutual acquaintances, he'd sent Victoria a single text message after his wife filed for divorce: "Don't ever contact me again." The financial support he'd been providing stopped instantly. Victoria, already facing federal charges and mounting legal bills, was now also completely alone and financially cut off. I watched this unfold from a distance, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. I hadn't set out to destroy Victoria's life. I'd simply refused to keep protecting her from the consequences of her own choices. But the cascade was undeniable. Every lie she'd told, every person she'd hurt, every manipulative act was catching up with her simultaneously. The golden child who'd spent 29 years being shielded from accountability was now facing it from every direction at once. Margaret called me one evening after the affair became public knowledge. "I saw the news about Victoria. How are you handling all of this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels vindicated, but part of me just feels sad. She could have been different. If our parents hadn't enabled every bad choice, hadn't taught her that she was exempt from consequences, maybe she wouldn't have become this person." "That's not your responsibility to fix," Margaret said gently. "You're not the one who raised her to be this way, and you're not obligated to keep covering for her." But the biggest betrayal had yet to be revealed. The biggest betrayal, it turned out, wasn't anything Victoria or my parents did to me. It was what they did to each other once survival instincts kicked in. Elena received copies of court filings that revealed my parents had hired separate attorneys, not just different lawyers from the same firm, but competing counsel who were actively working against each other's interests. My mother's attorney filed documents arguing that she'd been financially controlled by my father for their entire marriage, that she'd questioned his business practices repeatedly, and that she'd been essentially a victim of his schemes. Attached were email printouts spanning years where she'd asked about the accounts in Grace's name and been told to stay out of it. My father's attorney countered that my mother had been fully aware and complicit, that she'd actively participated in manipulating me for money, and that she couldn't claim ignorance now to avoid consequences. He produced text messages where she'd coached Victoria on how to ask me for loans, suggesting specific emergencies that would trigger my guilt most effectively. They were eviscerating each other in legal filings, each trying to position themselves as the less culpable party. The marriage that had endured 38 years was dissolving not gradually, but explosively, with all the private resentments and buried hostilities suddenly weaponized in court documents. The most damning evidence came from an accidental recording. Victoria had called our mother, and the voicemail system had captured a conversation that our parents didn't realize was being recorded. Elena played it for me in her office, and I listened to my parents' voices discussing their legal strategy with shocking callousness. "This is all Victoria's fault," my father's voice said clearly. "If she hadn't posted that goddamn video, Grace would have just swallowed it like she always does." My mother's response was quieter but audible. I told you we pushed too hard. Grace was always smarter than Victoria. I always knew she'd figure things out eventually if we weren't careful. You resented her, my father said. It wasn't a question. Of course I resented her, my mother snapped. She was everything Victoria wasn't: disciplined, intelligent, successful without even trying. Do you know how hard it is to watch your younger daughter struggle with basic competence while your older daughter excels at everything? I couldn't stand it. At least with Victoria, I felt needed. The recording was 2 minutes long, and every word of it was admissible as evidence. It proved consciousness of their wrongdoing, demonstrated premeditation, and revealed the psychological dynamics that had driven their treatment of me for decades. Elena added it to our already substantial evidence file. Meanwhile, the social consequences were reaching their full effect. My parents' church, where they'd been members for 25 years, asked them to take a break from active participation while they dealt with family matters. The request was polite but unmistakable. They were no longer welcome. Their neighborhood social club quietly removed them from the membership roster. The explanation given was administrative restructuring, but everyone understood what it meant. My mother's book club stopped sending meeting invitations. Her volunteer position at the library, which she'd held for over a decade, was terminated with a generic letter about changing organizational needs. My father faced even harsher consequences. The planning commission he'd served on for 15 years received a petition from community members requesting his removal. The petition cited moral character concerns and criminal charges pending. He resigned before they could vote on it, but the humiliation was complete. Several of his consulting clients moved their accounts to competitors, not wanting to be associated with someone under federal investigation. I heard about all of this through Elena, through Margaret, and through the occasional acquaintance who thought I should know how thoroughly my family's reputation had collapsed. The social capital they'd spent decades building, the respectability they'd valued above everything, including me, had evaporated in less than a year. The isolation they'd inflicted on me my entire life had become their reality, and watching from a distance I could see they had no coping mechanisms for it. They'd never learned to exist without external validation, without a social network to reinforce their self-image. Being unwanted, being avoided, being the subject of whispered conversations, these were experiences they had no framework for handling. Victoria's response to mounting pressure was the most visible and the most desperate. She started calling me late at night, her voice slurred with alcohol, leaving rambling voicemails that swung wildly between self-pity and accusation. "Grace, it's me. I know you won't answer, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, can we just talk? I'm falling apart here, and you're the only one who—" The message cut off mid-sentence. Another night. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? You always did. Perfect Grace with her perfect job and her perfect life, and I'm just the screw-up. Well, congratulations, you destroyed me. Happy now." Then back to pleading. "I didn't know about the credit cards. I swear I didn't know they were in your name. I thought Mom and Dad were just helping me. Please, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you." Elena had instructed me not to respond to any contact attempts. "Every interaction is an opportunity for manipulation," she'd warned. "Let her spiral. Don't engage." So I listened to Victoria's messages with a detachment I wouldn't have been capable of a year ago. I heard the manipulation tactics, the self-victimization, the blame-shifting, the attempts to trigger my old caretaker instincts. "You were always the strong one," she said in one particularly rambling message. "You could handle anything. Why couldn't you just handle this like you always did? Why did you have to make it into such a big deal?" That message revealed everything. Victoria wasn't sorry she'd hurt me. She was sorry I'd stopped absorbing the damage silently. She was sorry there were finally consequences for actions she'd been committing for years. She wanted the old Grace back, the one who cleaned up messes, who forgave everything, who sacrificed herself so Victoria wouldn't have to face reality. But that Grace was gone. And Victoria was discovering what life looked like without someone to catch her when she fell. Then the detective called me with information that changed everything. Detective Morrison's call came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work reviewing a client portfolio when my phone rang with his number. I stepped into an empty conference room to take the call. "Ms. Coleman, I've uncovered something that I think you need to know about immediately," he said, his voice carrying an urgency I hadn't heard before. "We've been reviewing your parents' financial records as part of the fraud investigation, and we found some unusual activity in the weeks leading up to your birthday." "What kind of activity?" "Bank records show your parents made multiple visits to their financial institution 2 weeks before your 36th birthday. They were inquiring about a trust account, specifically how to gain access to a trust that wasn't in their names." He paused. "Ms. Coleman, were you aware that your maternal grandmother established a substantial trust for you?" I felt my breath catch. "My grandmother died 18 months ago. I knew she left me something, but the estate lawyer said it wouldn't be distributed until certain conditions were met. I assumed it was a small amount, maybe enough to help with the legal fees." "It's not small," Detective Morrison said. "The trust is worth over $800,000. And it includes something else, 51% ownership of Coleman Financial Consulting." The room tilted. "That's my father's company." "Actually, it was your grandmother's company. She provided the initial capital and was a co-founder. Your father ran operations, but she owned the controlling share. And when she died, she left that controlling share to you, not to him." I sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. "When was I supposed to receive this?" "On your 36th birthday," Detective Morrison said. "The trust had a trigger clause. Everything transfers to you automatically when you turn 36, provided you meet certain conditions. Your parents knew about this. The bank records show them asking specifically about competency challenges, whether someone could be declared incompetent to manage their own finances, and what kind of evidence would be required." My mind was racing, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The cake incident. It was 2 days after my birthday. "That's what caught my attention," Detective Morrison said quietly. "Ms. Coleman, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before answering. Do you think the assault was really just a joke that went wrong? Or was it an attempt to create documented evidence that you were unstable, incompetent, someone who couldn't handle your own affairs?" I couldn't speak. The video played in my mind, the excessive force, the laughter, Victoria filming everything with deliberate care. "She was documenting it," I whispered. "Victoria wasn't just posting for entertainment. She was creating evidence." "That's my theory," Detective Morrison confirmed. "If they could show a pattern of instability, overreacting to harmless pranks, maybe even violent responses, they might have grounds to challenge the trust transfer. At minimum, they could delay it with legal proceedings." I ended the call and immediately contacted the estate attorney who'd handled my grandmother's will. His name was Robert Chen, and he'd sent me a brief letter after her death explaining that she'd left me a bequest to be distributed later. I'd been too grief-stricken to push for details at the time. Mr. Chen agreed to see me that same afternoon. His office was downtown, elegant and quiet, and when I arrived, he was already preparing documents for me to review. "Ms. Coleman, I'm glad you finally reached out," he said. "Your grandmother was very specific about when I could discuss this with you. The trust terms state that all information is to be disclosed only after your 36th birthday and only to you directly." He spread documents across his desk. "Your grandmother established this trust 5 years ago after witnessing how your family treated you. She was very explicit in her instructions. The trust transfers completely to you on your 36th birthday, provided you maintain financial independence and demonstrate sound judgment. She was worried your family might try to challenge the transfer, so she built in protections." "She knew," I said. "She knew what they were doing to me." "She documented everything," Mr. Chen confirmed. "She kept notes about family gatherings she attended, conversations she overheard, patterns she observed. She was building a case to protect you, even after her death." He handed me an envelope sealed with wax, my name written across it in my grandmother's careful handwriting. "She left this for you. Instructions were to give it to you only after your 36th birthday and only when you asked about the trust." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter written on my grandmother's personal stationery, dated 3 months before her death. "My dearest Grace," it began. "If you're reading this, you've survived another year in that family. I know what they've done to you. I saw it all, though I was too old to fight them directly by the time I understood the full extent of their cruelty. This inheritance isn't just money, it's your weapon and your shield. Use it to free yourself from them. The business shares give you control over your father's company, the thing he values most in this world. He built Coleman Financial Consulting with my money with my initial investment and continued financial support. But he treated my granddaughter like she was worthless. I'm giving you the power to either reclaim that company and run it yourself, or force him to buy you out at fair market value, which will hurt him deeply, both financially and emotionally. Either choice is yours. You are not weak, Grace. You are not less than. You are the strongest person I ever met, and it breaks my heart that I didn't protect you better while I was alive. I let them hurt you because I didn't want to believe my own son capable of such cruelty. I was wrong. I was weak. But you're not. You never were. That quiet strength you've shown your whole life, that ability to survive what would have broken most people, that's real power. Now I'm giving you the tools to use it. Protect yourself, my darling girl, and remember that you were loved exactly as you are. I saw you. I always saw you. With all my heart, Grandma Catherine." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. My grandmother had known. She'd understood what was happening, and had spent her final years building me an escape route I didn't even know existed. Mr. Chen pushed a tissue box toward me. "The timing of the assault concerns me greatly, Ms. Coleman. Your father knew about this trust. He knew the transfer date, and 2 weeks before it he was inquiring about competency challenges." Suddenly, the past 36 years snapped into perfect, horrifying focus. Mr. Chen wasn't finished. As I sat in his office still holding my grandmother's letter, he reached into a locked drawer and produced a small USB drive in a protective case. "Your grandmother left this with specific instructions," he said. "She wanted you to have it only after reading her letter. She said you'd understand its importance once you knew the full context." I turned the USB drive over in my hands. It was labeled in my grandmother's handwriting, "For Grace the Truth." "What's on it?" I asked. "Audio recordings," Mr. Chen said. "Your grandmother recorded conversations in her home over the last 2 years of her life. She was meticulous about noting dates and participants. Everything on this drive is legally admissible under Colorado law, as she was a participant in all conversations." I took the drive to Elena's office directly from Mr. Chen's. We sat in her conference room and plugged it into her laptop, 8 audio files each labeled with a date and location. Elena pressed play on the first one. My grandmother's voice came through slightly muffled, as if the recording device was concealed. "Catherine's living room, March 15th, 2023, she'd noted at the beginning. Then other voices joined my mother and father visiting her house. "Mother, we need to discuss Grace's trust," my father said, his voice tense. "She turns 36 next year. The timing is unfortunate." "Unfortunate how?" my grandmother asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Grace is too passive to ever fight back," my mother said. These were the first words I heard my mother speak on the recording, and they hit me like a physical blow. "We've been using her name for credit lines for years. She hasn't noticed. She won't notice the trust either, not if we manage it properly." "You want to manage her inheritance?" my grandmother asked. "She doesn't need that much money," my father said. "She has a good job. We need it more for Victoria for the business. Grace would want to help family. She always does." Elena paused the recording. "Grace, this proves premeditation. They were planning to exploit your inheritance over a year before it was due to transfer." The second recording was worse. Victoria's voice younger and carefree, talking to a friend, while my grandmother apparently sat nearby at some family gathering. "Honestly, Mom and Dad love me because I'm interesting," Victoria said. "Grace is just useful and boring. Like she exists to make me look better and to give us money when we need it. That's literally her purpose in the family. I listened to my sister reduce me to a utility, my worth measured only by what I could provide, and felt something cold settle in my chest. The third recording was dated 2 months before my birthday. My parents' voices again, this time with Victoria present. "The trust transfers on her birthday," my father said. "Once that happens, we lose access completely. She'll own controlling shares of the company. She'll have financial independence. We'll have no leverage." "What if we challenge it?" my mother asked. "On competency grounds. We'd need evidence that she's unstable, incapable of managing finances," my father said. "The will has a clause transfers only if she maintains sound mental state. If we can document instability, we could delay the transfer, maybe even have trustees appointed." Victoria's voice cut in. "So we need her to look crazy, to overreact to something in front of witnesses." "Something that seems harmless," my mother added. "So when she responds badly, it looks disproportionate." There was a pause, then my father spoke again. "The birthday party. We can do something at her party that looks like innocent fun. If she reacts badly, really badly, we'll have witnesses. Victoria can record it." "She'll be too embarrassed to defend herself," my mother agreed. "Grace always is. She'll just take it and apologize, which makes her look unstable. Or she'll get angry, which makes her look unstable. Either way, we have our evidence." "Perfect," Victoria said. "I'll make sure to get good footage." Elena stopped the recording. The silence in her office was absolute. I sat frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to process what I'd just heard. The birthday assault wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't a prank that went too far. It was a calculated attack designed to either humiliate me into submission or provoke a reaction they could use to steal my inheritance. "Grace," Elena said gently, "do you understand what this means? This is conspiracy to commit fraud. This is premeditated assault. This is documentary evidence of intent to harm you for financial gain." The remaining recordings provided more context. My parents discussing the credit fraud, Victoria complaining about her gambling losses, my grandmother carefully documenting it all while they thought she was just a confused old woman they could talk freely around. Mr. Chen had also provided detailed documentation of the business ownership. Coleman Financial Consulting, the company my father had built his entire professional identity around, was now mine. 51% of shares transferred automatically on my 36th birthday. The company was valued at approximately $2.3 million, making my controlling stake worth roughly $1.2 million. Elena pulled up the corporate structure documents. "Grace, as majority shareholder, you have ultimate authority. You can remove your father as CEO. You can restructure the company entirely. You can force a buyout, make him purchase your shares at market value, which he'd have to finance through loans. Or you can simply maintain ownership and require your approval for every major decision he wants to make." I looked at the documents spread before me, the recordings, the ownership papers, my grandmother's letter. She'd given me everything. Not just money, but power. Real, tangible power over the person who'd hurt me most. "Your father spent 36 years treating you like you were worthless," Elena said. "Now he needs your signature to run his own company. He works for you, Grace. Every decision he makes requires your approval." And her words became my compass for the final strike. For months, I'd let Elena speak for me. I'd let court documents tell my story in clinical language, let investigators present evidence, let the legal system grind forward without my voice. But after hearing my grandmother's recordings, after understanding the depth of the conspiracy against me, I realized I needed to speak for myself, not for revenge, but for the thousands of other invisible daughters who might be living what I'd survived. I spent 3 days crafting a single social media post. I kept it private, viewable only to friends and professional contacts, people who knew me, not strangers seeking drama. I chose my words carefully, working with Elena to ensure nothing compromised the legal cases, but everything honored the truth. The post included the birthday video and 2 X-ray images showing my facial fractures. I wrote, "This is what happened to me on my 36th birthday. My family called it a joke. The ER doctor called it assault. For years, I minimized my family's treatment as just how they are, the way we're taught to accept mistreatment from people who claim to love us. The doctor was the first person who ever told me this is abuse. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but because I know I'm not the only invisible daughter. If you're the one who always forgives, who always helps, who's told you're too sensitive, when you express hurt, you deserve better. You're not overreacting. You're not too dramatic. You're not too sensitive. You're surviving. Resources: National Domestic Violence Hotline, Adult Children of Dysfunctional Families, Support Groups, Legal Aid for Family Abuse Survivors. I included links to support organizations and posted it on a Sunday evening, then closed my laptop and tried not to think about it. By Monday morning, the post had been shared 300 times. By Monday evening, 3,000. By Wednesday, over 50,000 people had shared it, and it had reached far beyond my intended audience of friends and colleagues. The comments overwhelmed me. Thousands of women, many listing their ages as 50, 60, 70, shared their own stories in my comment section, and in their own posts that linked back to mine. Each story was unique in details but identical in pattern. The scapegoat daughter, the golden child sibling, the parents who demanded everything and gave nothing. The years of being told to keep the peace, to be understanding, to not rock the boat. I thought I was alone, one woman wrote. 43 years I thought something was wrong with me. Your story showed me it wasn't me. It was them. Another comment read, I was repeating this pattern with my own daughter without realizing it. You saved my marriage, my relationship with my child. Thank you for your courage. A woman named Patricia, who I recognized from my support group, wrote, Grace's story gave me permission to finally go no contact with my family. I'm 64 years old. I waited 64 years to choose myself. If you're reading this and wondering if you're justified in protecting yourself, you are. Mental health professionals began sharing my post with their own commentary. Dr. Sarah Mills, a family therapist with a large following, wrote a thread analyzing the dynamics. Grace's story exemplifies what we call the identified patient phenomenon. One family member is designated as the problem to avoid examining systemic dysfunction. The invisible abuse she experienced is epidemic, particularly among women socialized to prioritize family harmony over their own well-being. A domestic violence advocate named Jennifer Torres shared it with the caption, Emotional and financial abuse don't leave visible scars, but they destroy lives just as effectively as physical violence. Grace Coleman's story matters because it names what millions of people experience but can't articulate. My professional email inbox flooded with messages. Colleagues I'd worked with for years reached out, many admitting they'd had no idea what I was enduring. Some shared their own family estrangement stories. My boss, Richard, sent a personal email, Your courage in speaking up matters. Your position here is secure, and we're proud to have you as part of our team. Within days, media requests started arriving. Local news stations wanted interviews. Podcasts about family dynamics requested my participation. A producer from a national morning show reached out through Elena's office. The attention was overwhelming, and frankly terrifying. Elena helped me set strict boundaries. You control the narrative, she told me. You don't owe anyone your story beyond what you choose to share. Pick one interview if you want to do any at all. Pick someone who'll handle it with sensitivity and won't sensationalize your pain. After reviewing several options, I agreed to speak with Amanda Hughes, an investigative journalist known for her thoughtful coverage of family law and domestic violence issues. She'd written several articles about elder abuse and family exploitation that demonstrated real understanding of the complexities involved. The interview took place in Elena's office with Elena present throughout. Amanda was professional, prepared, and respectful. She'd reviewed all the public court documents and came with informed questions rather than sensational ones. Grace, your case has resonated with hundreds of thousands of people, Amanda said. Why do you think that is? Because it's not unique, I answered. The specifics are mine, but the pattern is universal. There are millions of people, mostly women, who've been designated as their family's emotional support system, their financial backup, their scapegoat when things go wrong. We're socialized to accept this. We're told that good daughters sacrifice that family loyalty means accepting mistreatment, that setting boundaries is selfish. I think people are responding because someone finally said that's abuse, and you don't have to accept it. The resulting article, published 2 weeks later in a major national outlet, was titled, "The Invisible Daughter: How Family Favoritism Became Felony." Amanda had woven together my story expert analysis on family scapegoating dynamics and statistics on financial abuse within families. She included commentary from prosecutors about why these cases are underreported, and from psychologists about the long-term effects of being the identified patient in a dysfunctional family system. Crucially, she'd framed me not as a victim, but as someone who'd fought back intelligently and legally. The article portrayed my family not as cartoon villains, but as people whose patterns of dysfunction had escalated into criminal behavior. It was fair, thorough, and devastating in its implications. The article generated over 500,000 views in the first week. It was shared in legal communities, mental health forums, and family law discussions. My family's attorneys called Elena in a panic. Public opinion was overwhelmingly on my side, which would influence any jury pool if criminal cases went to trial. The narrative they'd hoped to construct, vindictive daughter exaggerating family disputes, was impossible to maintain against the tide of public understanding. I'd taken control of my own story. I'd named what happened to me clearly and without apology. And in doing so, I'd given thousands of other invisible daughters permission to do the same. It was time to face them one final time. Elena arranged what she called a settlement discussion for a Friday afternoon at her law office. She told my family's attorneys it was an opportunity to discuss plea deals and civil settlements before cases went to trial. What she didn't tell them was how thoroughly we'd be prepared. I arrived an hour early. Margaret came with me, her presence a deliberate choice. Elena had her paralegal set up recording equipment. Everything said in this room would be documented by a professional stenographer Elena had hired specifically for this meeting. We arranged the conference room carefully. I sat at the head of the long table, Elena on my right, Margaret on my left. The stenographer sat discreetly in the corner. 3 chairs sat empty on the opposite side, waiting. When my parents and Victoria arrived with their respective attorneys, I watched their faces as they entered the room. They'd expected to find me alone, or perhaps with just Elena. They'd expected me to be emotional, vulnerable, possibly ready to negotiate out of exhaustion or residual family loyalty. Instead, they found me flanked by allies, calm and composed, sitting in the power position at the table. My father's face flushed red when he saw Margaret. "What is she doing here? She has no right. Ms. Coleman has the floor," Elena said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a blade. "You'll speak when invited. Please sit down." The attorneys guided my family to their assigned seats. I watched them settle, uncomfortably watched the dynamics register. For the first time in 36 years, they were in my space, following my rules, waiting for my permission to speak. The power reversal was so complete, it was almost tangible. I'd spent weeks preparing what I wanted to say. I'd written it down, revised it, practiced it with Elena and Margaret until my voice stayed steady. Now, looking at the 3 people who'd spent my entire life making me feel small, I found I didn't need my notes. The words came easily, calmly, with the weight of accumulated truth behind them. "I want to start by listing some facts," I began. My voice was quiet but clear. When I was 10 years old, my birthday party was canceled to accommodate Victoria's dance competition. It was never rescheduled. When I was 15, Victoria pushed me down the basement stairs, breaking my nose and ribs. "You refused to take me to the hospital because it might raise questions that would affect Victoria's reputation." The injuries healed incorrectly, causing permanent damage that an ER doctor documented this year. I continued methodically, watching their faces. When I was 16, I won the Henderson Academic Excellence Scholarship. You skipped the ceremony for Victoria's cheerleading practice and never mentioned the achievement. Over the past 10 years, you extracted approximately $75,000 from me through manipulation and identity theft. For 3 years, Victoria used credit cards opened fraudulently in my name to fund a gambling addiction, racking up $45,000 in debt I didn't create. My mother started to speak, but Elena raised a hand. Ms. Coleman isn't finished. On my 36th birthday, you orchestrated a coordinated assault designed to either humiliate me into submission or create evidence you could use to challenge my grandmother's trust. You planned it, you executed it, you documented it. Not because it was funny, but because you wanted to steal my inheritance. I pulled out my laptop and pressed play on one of my grandmother's recordings. My parents' voices filled the conference room casual and callous as they discussed using my name for credit lines. I watched color drain from their faces as they heard themselves plot against me in their own words. I played the second recording, Victoria reducing me to a utility, my only purpose to make her look better and provide money. Then the third, the birthday plan laid out in chilling detail. The stenographer's fingers flew across her keyboard, documenting everything. My family's attorneys looked increasingly uncomfortable, recognizing that any defense they'd planned to mount was crumbling in real time. I have 8 recordings total, I said. All legal under Colorado law, all admissible in court, all proving that you didn't just hurt me, you conspired to defraud me, to assault me, to destroy me financially and emotionally. My father found his voice, or at least his old authoritative tone. He stood up, hands flat on the table. I built this family, I built my company. You're nothing without us, Grace. You were always nothing. We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us. I'd been waiting for this moment. I reached into my folder and slid documents across the table. Corporate ownership papers, my grandmother's will, the trust documentation. Actually, Dad, Grandma Catherine built that company with her money. She provided the capital. She was the co-founder. And when she died, she left me 51% ownership. You own 35%. I watched him pick up the papers, watched his hands shake as he read them. So legally speaking, you work for me now. Every major business decision you want to make requires my signature. I control the company you've built your entire identity around. His face went from red to white. He sat down heavily, still gripping the documents. You spent 36 years treating me like I was worthless. I continued, my voice still steady. You told me I was nothing. You used me, stole from me, hurt me, and expected me to keep accepting it because we're family. But family isn't DNA, Dad. Family is earned through love and respect and basic human decency. And you failed at all of those things. I stood up, gathering my materials. Margaret and Elena stood with me. You're not my family anymore. You're just people who hurt me. And I'm done letting you. I looked at each of them. My father still white-faced and stunned. My mother crying silently. Victoria staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a deep, final release. Your attorneys have our settlement terms. Criminal plea deals are with the prosecutors. I have no control over those. But the civil suits, those are mine. And I'm not negotiating. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. I hope someday you understand what you did. Not for my sake, I don't need your understanding anymore. But for yours. I left the conference room with Elena and Margaret flanking me, leaving my family in their assigned seats in my space, powerless for the first time in our shared history. But justice still had one last chapter to write. The legal proceedings stretched over 4 more months after the confrontation. Victoria's case resolved first as her attorney pushed aggressively for a plea deal once he understood the mountain of evidence against her. Elena kept me informed of every development, but I wasn't required to attend most of the proceedings. The assistant district attorney handling Victoria's case called me once to explain what they were offering. Ms. Coleman, given the strength of evidence, the video medical records, financial documentation, and your grandmother's recordings, we could almost certainly win at trial. However, Ms. Victoria Coleman's attorney has approached us about a plea agreement. I wanted your input before we proceed. What are they offering? She'll plead guilty to felony identity theft and misdemeanor assault. In exchange, we drop the burglary charge to criminal trespassing. She's looking at 18 months in minimum security federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She'll be required to pay full restitution. We're calculating $95,000, which is double the amount stolen plus interest and fees. She'll also complete 200 hours of community service after release and attend court-mandated addiction counseling. I thought about Victoria's drunk voicemails, her attempts to position herself as the victim, her complete inability to take responsibility. Will she actually serve the prison time? Yes. Federal sentences require at least 85% of the time to be served. She'll be in for approximately 15 months minimum. And Ms. Coleman, the felony record is permanent. She'll lose voting rights in Colorado, face severe employment restrictions, won't be able to obtain professional licenses, and will have significant difficulty renting housing or obtaining credit. Her life as she knew it is over. Accept the plea deal, I said. I don't need a trial. I just need her held accountable. The sentencing hearing happened on a cold Tuesday in February. I attended sitting in the gallery while Victoria stood before the judge. She'd lost weight, looked older than her 29 years, wore no makeup. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she gave a prepared statement about being sorry and wanting to make amends. It sounded hollow, rehearsed by her attorney. She never looked at me. The judge's response was measured but firm. Ms. Coleman, you systematically exploited your sister's identity for years, causing significant financial and emotional harm. The evidence shows this was not impulsive but calculated. While I appreciate your stated remorse, accountability requires consequences. I'm accepting the plea agreement and sentencing you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. He detailed the restitution, community service, and counseling requirements, then added, I hope you use this time to reflect on the person you want to be. This court is adjourned. Victoria was led away by federal marshals. I watched her go, feeling neither satisfaction nor grief, just closure. My parents' cases took longer to resolve. The IRS investigation was thorough and slow, and federal prosecutors built their case methodically. Eventually, my father's attorney negotiated what Elena called the best deal he could hope for given the circumstances. My father pleaded no contest to tax evasion fraud and conspiracy in the identity theft scheme. The prosecutor explained to me that no contest means he didn't admit guilt, but acknowledged the evidence was sufficient for conviction. In exchange for his cooperation and agreement not to contest the charges, he received a suspended 2-year jail sentence, meaning he'd serve no actual prison time, but would remain under strict probation conditions for 5 years. Any violation of probation would trigger the jail sentence. My mother, whose cooperation with investigators had been extensive, received 3 years of probation for her role as an accessory. No jail time, but significant restrictions on her activities and regular check-ins with a probation officer. But the IRS penalties were what truly devastated them. Elena walked me through the calculations. The IRS assessed $47,000 in back taxes on unreported income, $28,000 in penalties and interest, and a $15,000 criminal fraud fine. Total $90,000. They have to pay it within 2 years, or face additional penalties and potential criminal charges. Can they afford that? Not easily. They'll have to liquidate assets. I've already seen documents showing they're selling their second car and taking out a home equity loan. Your father's business is under federal financial monitoring for the next 5 years, which means regular audits and restrictions on how he can operate. Several of his longtime clients have already moved their accounts elsewhere. The scandal has damaged his professional reputation permanently. My father's business, the company he'd built his identity around, was hemorrhaging clients. People didn't want to work with a financial consultant under federal investigation for fraud. The irony was almost poetic, a man who advised others on financial management brought down by his own financial crimes. The civil case settlement came through in late March. Elena had structured it carefully, targeting the assets my parents valued most. The total settlement was $175,000 payable over 3 years. The payment structure required funds from my father's business accounts, his retirement savings, and a lien against their home equity. Every quarter for the next 12 quarters, they'd write me a check, a constant reminder of what their abuse had cost them. Plus, you retain the 51% ownership of Coleman Financial Consulting, Elena reminded me. Current valuation puts your stake at approximately $1.2 million. You can hold it as an investment, take an active role in the company, or force a buyout. Your choice. I'd already made my decision about the business, but I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. Let my father wonder. Let him operate under the uncertainty of not knowing whether I'd force him out or demand his compliance at every turn. That uncertainty was its own form of accountability. When Elena tallied everything, the restitution Victoria owed, the IRS penalties, the civil settlement, and the legal fees, all three of them had incurred, the total financial impact on my family exceeded $400,000. Their social standing was destroyed. Their financial security was shattered. My father's professional reputation was permanently damaged. Victoria faced 15 months in federal prison, followed by years of restricted freedom and a felony record that would follow her forever. I hadn't destroyed them out of vengeance or cruelty. I'd simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their own actions. Every penalty was legal, proportionate, and justified. Federal judges, prosecutors, IRS investigators, and civil courts had all reviewed the evidence and agreed what my family did to me was criminal, and accountability was required. Justice isn't revenge. It's the natural result of violations being brought into the light and addressed through proper channels. My family had operated in darkness for decades, confident that I'd never fight back, never speak up, never demand better. When I finally did, the legal system did exactly what it was designed to do. It held them accountable. I stood on my apartment balcony the evening after the final settlement was signed, looking out at the Colorado sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For 36 years, I'd carried the weight of their expectations, their demands, their casual cruelty. That weight was gone now. Not just lifted, but permanently removed. And for the first time in 36 years, I felt free. Freedom, I discovered, wasn't just the absence of abuse. It was the presence of choice. And I had choices now, real ones unencumbered by guilt or obligation, or the weight of family expectations. I returned to work at Thornton Financial Group 6 months after the confrontation, once the bulk of legal proceedings had settled into their final phases. My colleagues welcomed me back with a respect that felt different than before. They'd witnessed my strength through the public aspects of the case, had read the articles, had seen me stand up for myself in ways most people only imagine doing. Richard called me into his office my first week back. "Grace, we want to promote you to senior partner," he said without preamble. "You've always had the expertise and the client results. But frankly, you never advocated for yourself. You let others take credit, you accepted less than you deserved. You didn't push back on unfair distributions of work. Something's changed." "Everything's changed," I said simply. "We've noticed, and we want to recognize it formally. Senior partner comes with equity stake, significantly higher compensation, and a leadership role in mentoring junior consultants. Are you interested?" I accepted without hesitation, without the self-doubt that would have plagued the old Grace. The woman who'd fought federal cases and faced down her abusers didn't need to question whether she deserved a promotion she'd earned 10 times over. The mentoring aspect became unexpectedly meaningful. I found myself drawn to younger women in the firm, particularly those who seemed to carry the weight of difficult family situations. I recognized the signs now, the way they'd apologize for things that weren't their fault, the guilt in their voices when they had to set work boundaries, the tendency to give credit to others for their own ideas. One of my mentees, a brilliant 28-year-old analyst named Jennifer, came to my office in tears one afternoon. Her parents were demanding she give up her career to move home and care for an ailing grandmother. "They say I'm selfish," she said. "That family comes first. But I love my job. I love my life here. Does that make me a terrible person?" "No," I said firmly. "It makes you a person with boundaries. There are always options: hired, care, shared family responsibility, visiting regularly without sacrificing your career. But Jennifer, here's what I learned the hard way: your family's inability to solve their problems without sacrificing you is not your emergency. You're allowed to build a life that belongs to you. I saw her shoulders relax, saw the validation she needed reflected in my words. This became part of my new purpose, helping other women recognize that they weren't required to set themselves on fire to keep others warm. I also started accepting speaking engagements. Local organizations focused on financial literacy invited me to discuss protecting yourself from family financial exploitation. Domestic violence groups asked me to speak about recognizing non-physical abuse. I was selective, only accepting invitations where I felt I could genuinely help, but each speech reinforced a truth I was still learning. My experience had value beyond my own healing. It could light the way for others. The decision about Coleman Financial Consulting took longer to make. I consulted with Margaret, with Elena, even with my therapist. I held 51% of a company worth approximately $2.3 million. I could take over operations, force my father out, and run it myself. I could maintain ownership and simply enjoy the revenue while he operated under my authority. Or I could sell. "What do you want, Grace?" Margaret asked over coffee one Saturday morning. "Not what would hurt him most, not what's most financially optimal. What do you actually want?" I thought about that question for days, and I realized I didn't want to be tied to my father's company. I didn't want quarterly board meetings where I'd have to see him, didn't want my financial security dependent on a business he ran, didn't want any connection that kept me in his orbit. I wanted complete, total separation. "I'm selling," I told Elena, "but on my terms." Elena negotiated the sale with precision. My father would buy my 51% stake for $1.3 million, slightly above market value, which his attorney protested, but eventually accepted because he had no leverage. The sale agreement included a clause I insisted on my father had to acknowledge in writing, that Coleman Financial Consulting was built on Catherine Coleman's capital investment and business expertise, and that without her contributions the company would not exist. Watching him sign that acknowledgement was more satisfying than any revenge could have been. He had to admit in legally binding documents that his success was built on my grandmother's foundation, and that I inherited it fairly and deservedly. The sale finalized in late spring. I deposited $1.3 million into my accounts and sat with the reality of that number. I'd never imagined having this kind of financial security. It wasn't just money, it was options freedom, the ability to build whatever life I wanted without constraint. I worked with a financial advisor to invest wisely. The first thing I did was establish the Catherine Coleman Memorial Scholarship Fund, with an initial endowment of $300,000. The fund would provide grants to women escaping abusive family situations, money for education, career training therapy, legal fees, security deposits on apartments. Everything I wish had been available to me years earlier. I contributed $50,000 to domestic violence organizations that had supported me throughout the process. I funded my own early retirement plan, ensuring I could work because I wanted to, not because I had to. And I bought a house, a beautiful craftsman home in Boulder, about an hour from my old life, in a neighborhood where nobody knew my history or my family. It had a garden I could tend, large windows that filled rooms with light, and enough space that I never felt cramped or trapped. The personal healing was harder than the financial decisions. I started seeing a therapist regularly, Dr. Patricia Wu, who specialized in complex family trauma. "You're not here because you're broken," she told me in our first session. "You're here because you want to make sure you never accept mistreatment again. That's wisdom, not weakness." I blocked my parents' and Victoria's phone numbers. When letters arrived, and they did occasionally, I returned them unopened. When my father's sister, Aunt Diane, reached out trying to mediate a reconciliation, I responded once politely but firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not interested in reconciling with people who hurt me systematically for 36 years without genuine remorse or changed behavior. I'm focused on my own peace now. Please respect my boundaries." Dating was complicated. I joined a few apps, went on casual dinners, learned what it felt like to be pursued by men who found me interesting and attractive. I wasn't ready for anything serious. My therapist and I were still unpacking decades of learned behaviors around relationships. But I enjoyed the experience of being seen, of being chosen, of having men actually listen when I spoke. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during years of family crisis management. Sarah, my colleague from the professional development seminar, became a genuine friend. We had monthly dinners where we talked about workbooks, travel plans, normal conversations that didn't revolve around trauma or legal battles. I rediscovered hobbies I'd abandoned. I'd loved hiking in my 20s but had stopped because family obligations consumed every weekend. Now I drove to mountain trails on Saturday mornings, climbed until my legs ached and my mind cleared, stood at overlooks, breathing in thin air and feeling gloriously alone in the best possible way. My apartment filled with plants, books, art I'd chosen because I liked it, rather than because it matched some imagined expectation. My calendar filled with activities I wanted to do, rather than obligations I couldn't escape. My bank account grew steadily without mysterious drains to cover family emergencies that were never really emergencies. For the first time in my life, everything I had was mine. My home, my career, my time, my money, my peace. Nobody could take it. Nobody could guilt me out of it. Nobody could claim it belonged to them more than it belonged to me. But there was one more way to transform pain into purpose. The Katherine Coleman Memorial Scholarship Fund launched on what would have been my grandmother's 80th birthday. Margaret and I hosted a small ceremony at a community center inviting representatives from domestic violence organizations, therapists who worked with family trauma survivors, and a few journalists who'd covered the story responsibly. We didn't invite my family. This was about honoring my grandmother's legacy, not reopening old wounds. The fund's mission was specific, supporting women aged 30 to 50 who were escaping abusive family situations and needed financial assistance to rebuild their lives. We offered grants up to $15,000 for education, career training, therapy, legal fees, housing deposits, all the practical necessities required to start over. The application was intentionally simple, designed not to re-traumatize applicants by forcing them to relive abuse in excruciating detail. We asked what they needed, what they planned to do with support, and how they envisioned their future. I expected maybe 200 or 300 applications the first year. We received over 2,000. Margaret and I read them together, sitting in my dining room with laptops and tissues, taking breaks when the stories became too heavy. Each application represented a woman who'd found the courage to leave, to seek help, to imagine a different life. And each story echoed elements of our own. A 42-year-old woman from Ohio whose family had stolen her identity to open credit cards, leaving her with $60,000 in debt she didn't create. A 36-year-old from Texas whose parents expected her to financially support them, and her unemployed brother, while she struggled to pay her own rent. A 50-year-old from California who'd finally left her family after decades of being told her accomplishments didn't matter, and her role was to serve others. "Grace, listen to this one," Margaret said one evening, her voice thick with emotion. She read aloud, "I'm 48 years old. I spent my entire adult life being the family ATM and emotional support system. I thought I was trapped. Then I saw your story and realized I'm not required to save people who are destroying me. Your scholarship would help me go back to school to finish my nursing degree. I want to help others the way you helped me by showing that escape is possible." We both cried. These women weren't asking for handouts. They were asking for the same thing I needed: a bridge between where they were and where they could be. We awarded 30 scholarships in the first year. The selection process was agonizing. Choosing 30 from 2,000 meant rejecting thousands of worthy applicants. But we started somewhere. Each recipient received a letter informing them of the award, along with a personal note I wrote. "Your grandmother Katherine would be proud of you. I'm proud of you. You deserve this support. Use it to build the life you were always meant to have." The thank you letters that came back were overwhelming. A woman named Rebecca wrote, "I used the scholarship to pay for paralegal training. I just got my first job at a law firm. I'm earning my own money, supporting myself, and nobody can guilt me for it. You gave me more than financial help, you gave me permission to choose myself." Another recipient, Patricia, wrote, "I used the funds for therapy and a security deposit on my first apartment away from my family. I'm 62 years old, and this is the first time in my life I've lived alone. I cry sometimes from the sheer relief of silence, no demands, no guilt trips, no one treating me like I exist, only to serve them. Thank you for showing me this was possible." Each letter reinforced what I was learning. My pain hadn't been meaningless. It had become a bridge connecting me to thousands of women walking similar paths. 6 months after the scholarship launch, I received an unexpected email from a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Torres. She'd won an Emmy for a series on domestic violence and was developing a new project focused on non-physical forms of family abuse, the emotional, financial, and psychological violence that often goes unrecognized because it doesn't leave visible scars. "Your story exemplifies what I'm trying to illuminate," she wrote. "Would you be willing to discuss participating?" I was skeptical. The media attention around my case had been intense, and I'd turned down dozens of interview requests. But I researched Rachel's previous work and was impressed by her sensitivity and depth. Her documentaries didn't sensationalize pain, they honored it while educating viewers about systemic issues. I agreed to a preliminary meeting. Rachel came to Boulder, and we sat in my living room talking for 3 hours. She explained her vision, a 4-part documentary series examining different forms of family abuse that society typically dismisses as just family drama. She wanted to feature several survivors' stories, including mine, interwoven with expert commentary from psychologists, lawyers, and sociologists. "I need you to understand something," I told her. "I'm not interested in being portrayed as a helpless victim or as someone seeking revenge. I want to show that standing up for yourself is possible, that legal systems can work if you use them correctly, and that healing is a choice you make actively, not something that happens to you passively." "That's exactly the narrative I want to tell," Rachel said. "Can I ask, what would you need to feel comfortable participating?" I'd thought about this carefully. I control my narrative. Any footage you want to use, I review first. All proceeds from my participation go directly to the scholarship fund. And the documentary must include substantial educational content, warning signs of family abuse, resources for getting help, information about legal options. This can't just be trauma porn for viewers. It needs to serve a purpose. Rachel agreed to all my conditions. We spent the next several months filming. She interviewed me extensively about my history, my grandmother's recordings, the legal process, and my healing journey. She filmed me reading scholarship applications with Margaret, working with my therapist, speaking at a small domestic violence awareness event. She interviewed Elena Detective Morrison and even Mr. Chen, my grandmother's estate lawyer. She gathered the documentary evidence, the birthday video, medical records, financial fraud documentation, and presented it all with appropriate context and expert analysis. The documentary, titled "The Invisible Daughter Family Abuse, Hidden in Plain Sight," premiered on a major streaming platform on a Tuesday evening in November. I watched it alone in my living room, Margaret on video call, both of us nervous about how our stories had been translated into this public format. Rachel had done it beautifully. The documentary didn't exploit pain, it illuminated patterns. She included my story alongside 3 other survivors, showing how family scapegoating manifests across different circumstances but follows predictable dynamics. Psychologists explained the golden child scapegoat phenomenon. Financial experts discussed how easily family members can commit identity theft. Legal scholars examined why these cases are underreported and how the justice system can address them. My segments showed not just the abuse but the recovery, the legal strategy, the support systems, the deliberate rebuilding of life. The documentary ended with me speaking at an event, saying words I'd practiced, but deeply meant, "You don't owe anyone access to you just because you share DNA. Family is a behavior, not a title, and you're allowed to choose yourself." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first week, over 5 million people watched the documentary. My email inbox, which I'd created specifically for this purpose, filled with thousands of messages. Women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, writing to say they'd finally recognized their own experiences as abuse, rather than just how families are. One message read, "I'm 57 years old. I've been in therapy for a decade, trying to understand why I feel so guilty for setting boundaries with my family. Your documentary gave me the language I needed. I'm the scapegoat. I've always been the scapegoat. And that's not my fault." Another, "I showed your documentary to my daughter who's 23 and struggling with her grandparents' constant demands and criticism. She cried and said, 'That's exactly what's happening to me.' We're both in therapy now, learning to set boundaries together. Thank you for breaking the cycle in our family." Domestic violence organizations contacted me requesting permission to show the documentary in support groups and training sessions. Therapists wrote asking if they could recommend it to clients. Universities requested permission to use it in psychology and social work courses. And then came the speaking invitations. So many that Elena had to help me create a system for managing them. I developed strict criteria. I'd only speak at events focused on education and support, never sensationalism. I'd limit myself to one speaking engagement per month to avoid burnout. I'd charge speaker fees, not because I needed the money, but because free labor perpetuates the expectation that women's emotional labor should be unpaid, and those fees would go to the scholarship fund. My first major speaking engagement after the documentary premiered was at a national conference on family violence. I stood before an audience of 400 people, mostly women, mostly over 40, and shared my story not as a victim frozen in trauma, but as a survivor who'd reclaimed her power. For 36 years, I believed the story my family told about me, I said. That I was the problem. That I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding. Then I learned that the problem wasn't me, it was them. And the moment I understood that, everything changed. Not because they changed, they didn't. But because I stopped waiting for them to validate my reality. I validated it myself. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of women waited to speak with me to share their own stories to thank me for making them feel less alone. I had become my own family and found thousands of sisters in the process. The letter arrived 8 months after the documentary premiered, forwarded through Elena's office in a plain manila envelope. Elena called me before sending it. "Grace, your mother's attorney delivered a personal letter addressed to you. It's been screened, there's nothing threatening or manipulative in the legal sense, but I want you to decide if you even want to read it." "Send it," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. The letter was 6 pages handwritten on plain stationery, my mother's careful script filling each page. I sat at my dining table with coffee growing cold beside me and read it straight through. "Dear Grace," it began, "I don't expect you to respond to this letter. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take responsibility for what I did to you, even if that responsibility comes too late to matter. I've been in therapy for 6 months now. Court mandated at first, but I've continued on my own because I'm finally starting to understand things about myself I've spent 62 years avoiding. My therapist helped me see that I treated you the way my own mother treated me, like I was worth less than my siblings, like my accomplishments didn't matter, like my purpose was to make everyone else's life easier. I thought if I did the opposite with Victoria, if I loved her enough, praised her enough, protected her enough, I could fix what was broken in my own childhood. I didn't see that I was just repeating the cycle with you as the victim instead of me. Grace, you were always the better daughter. You were smarter, more capable, more genuinely kind than Victoria ever was. And I resented you for it because watching you succeed effortlessly reminded me of my own failures. Instead of being proud, I was jealous. Instead of celebrating you, I diminished you. Instead of protecting you, I hurt you. I can't undo 36 years of damage. The assault, the financial exploitation, the constant message that you didn't matter, none of that can be taken back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for another chance. I just needed you to know that I finally understand what I did, and I'm so sorry. Your father and I are divorcing. I can't be married to someone who treats people the way he treated you, the way I let him treat you. Victoria is in prison, and I visit her because she's my daughter, but I see her clearly now. I see the monster we created by never holding her accountable. I hope you're happy, Grace. I hope you've built the life you always deserved. And I hope someday you can forgive me not for my sake, but for yours. I understand if you never want to see me or speak to me again. You have that right. You've always had that right. I love you. I always did, even when I couldn't show it properly. I'm sorry I realized that too late. Mom. I read the letter 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to crumple it up, dismiss it as too little too late. Part of me felt something softening in my chest, not reconciliation, but perhaps the beginning of release. I called Margaret first. She sent me a letter, an apology. How do you feel about it? I don't know. It sounds genuine. She's taking responsibility without asking for anything. But Margaret, this is after legal consequences, after public humiliation, after losing everything. Would she have apologized if none of that happened? Probably not, Margaret said honestly. Does that make the apology meaningless? I thought about that question for days. I brought the letter to my therapy session with Dr. Wu, reading portions aloud while she listened without judgment. Grace, what would genuine remorse look like to you? Dr. Wu asked. I don't know. Changed behavior over time, but I'm not going to be around to witness that, so how would I ever know? Does the question of whether her remorse is genuine affect your own healing? That stopped me. It shouldn't. My healing shouldn't depend on whether she's actually sorry. Exactly. So let's separate 2 things: her apology and your forgiveness. Her apology is about her growth, her remorse, her journey. Your forgiveness is about you, your peace, your freedom, your choice to release resentment that's been weighing you down. Those are 2 entirely separate processes. I met with Elena and Margaret together to discuss how to respond. Elena reviewed the letter from a legal perspective. There's nothing here that undermines the settlements or court rulings. She's not asking you to recant testimony or change your position. This is purely personal. Should I respond at all? I asked. Margaret spoke carefully. I didn't respond when our father tried to apologize to me years ago. I regret that sometimes, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because silence left things unresolved in my own heart. You might find peace in responding, even if that response is just to set final boundaries. I spent a week drafting my reply, revising it repeatedly, working with Dr. Wu to ensure it expressed what I truly felt, rather than what I thought I should feel. The final version was brief, clear, and final. I acknowledge your apology, I wrote. I believe you're experiencing genuine remorse, and I hope your therapy continues to help you understand yourself and change your patterns. I forgive you not because you deserve it, or because it means we'll have a relationship, but because holding on to hatred was poisoning my own peace. Forgiveness for me means I'm letting go of waiting for you to become the mother I needed. I'm accepting that you couldn't be that person, and I'm moving forward without the weight of that unmet need. This doesn't mean reconciliation. I'm not interested in rebuilding a relationship with someone who hurt me systematically for 36 years, regardless of the reasons behind that hurt. I need you to respect my boundaries. No attempts at contact, no letters, no intermediaries trying to facilitate reunion. I hope you find peace in your own healing journey, but you won't find it with me. I'm building a life that doesn't include you, and that's not cruelty. It's self-preservation. Grace. Elena reviewed it, confirmed it set appropriate boundaries without creating legal issues, and I sent it through her office. After mailing it, I felt something unexpected lightness. Not happiness exactly, but relief. I'd been carrying the weight of my mother's failures, her inability to be the parent I needed, her choices that damaged me, her years of neglect and abuse. By forgiving her, I wasn't absolving her. I was setting down that weight and walking away from it. But not everyone understood the distinction. At a speaking engagement a month later, a woman in the audience raised her hand during the Q&A. How can you claim to have healed if you haven't reconciled with your family? Forgiveness means giving people another chance. Family is everything. Don't you think you're being harsh? I'd heard variations of this criticism before from acquaintances, from distant relatives, from strangers online who felt entitled to judge my choices. I'd learned to respond with calm clarity rather than defensiveness. Forgiveness and reconciliation are two separate concepts, I said. I've forgiven my family in the sense that I've released the hatred and resentment that was damaging my own peace. But forgiveness doesn't obligate me to expose myself to more harm. Reconciliation requires changed behavior demonstrated over time, genuine remorse shown through actions rather than words, and most importantly, my willingness to risk being hurt again. I'm not willing to take that risk. Protecting myself from people who hurt me repeatedly isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. The woman looked unconvinced. But they're your family. Don't you think everyone deserves a second chance? They had thousands of chances, I said quietly. Every day for 36 years was a chance to treat me with basic respect and dignity. They chose not to. I'm not obligated to provide infinite chances just because we share DNA. Family is a behavior, not a title. And they didn't behave like family. The audience applauded, and afterward dozens of women came up to thank me for articulating what they'd been feeling but couldn't express. Many were facing pressure from their own communities to reconcile with abusive family members, being told that maintaining boundaries made them bad daughters, ungrateful children, or vindictive people. The conversation prompted me to write an essay for a national women's magazine that had been following my story. The editor had reached out months ago asking if I'd contribute something about my experience, and this felt like the right topic. I titled it, "Forgiveness Doesn't Mean Reconciliation: Why Choosing Peace Over Family Duty Isn't Selfish." In it, I wrote, "We're taught that forgiveness requires reconciliation, that if you truly forgive someone, you must allow them back into your life. But this conflates two separate concepts. Forgiveness is an internal process where you release resentment for your own peace. Reconciliation is an external process requiring changed behavior, demonstrated remorse, and mutual willingness to rebuild trust. You can forgive someone for stealing from you without giving them access to your bank account again. You can forgive someone for hurting you without allowing them to hurt you in the future. You can wish someone well from a distance without inviting them back into proximity. True forgiveness sometimes means loving someone enough to let them go permanently, recognizing that the relationship is unhealthy and cannot be fixed, and choosing your own well-being over the social pressure to maintain family bonds at any cost. This doesn't make you cruel or vengeful, it makes you wise. It makes you someone who understands that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's the most basic form of self-respect. The essay was published 2 months later and immediately resonated with readers. The magazine received thousands of letters and emails from women saying the piece had given them permission to maintain boundaries they'd been guilted into abandoning. Several therapists wrote saying they'd been teaching this distinction to clients for years, but had never seen it articulated so clearly for a general audience. One letter particularly moved me. A 72-year-old woman wrote, "I've spent 50 years feeling guilty for cutting off my mother. Everyone told me I was heartless, that I'd regret it when she died. She passed away 5 years ago, and I don't regret it. I regret that she never became the mother I needed, but I don't regret protecting myself. Your essay validated 5 decades of my life. Thank you." I framed that letter and hung it in my office, a reminder that choosing peace over obligation wasn't just acceptable, it was necessary for survival. My mother never responded to my letter. I didn't expect her to. The boundary I'd set was clear, and she was respecting it. Whether that respect came from genuine understanding or simply legal necessity didn't matter anymore. The outcome was the same: I was free. And I learned that sometimes letting go is the greatest victory of all. 3 years had passed since that birthday party. 3 years since I'd lain on my parents' floor covered in cake and blood. 3 years since I'd believed I deserved that treatment. The woman I was then felt like a character from someone else's story, familiar but fundamentally distant, someone I recognized but no longer identified with. My life now bore no resemblance to the one I'd lived before. I'd bought a craftsman home in Boulder, Old Bones, good light, a garden that required attention, and rewarded it with blooms. The house was entirely mine in ways my old apartment never was. Every piece of furniture chosen because I liked it. Every wall color selected to please only me. Books on shelves because I wanted to read them, not because they looked impressive. Plants everywhere, succulents on windowsills, a fiddle-leaf fig in the corner, herbs growing in the kitchen, all thriving under care I finally had energy to provide. I still worked as a financial consultant, but I'd restructured my practice. I took fewer clients, charged more, and was selective about who I worked with. I declined clients who reminded me of my family, the ones who wanted to argue about invoices, who demanded emergency availability, but showed no respect for boundaries, who treated service providers as servants. I had enough money now that I could afford to be choosy, and I'd learned that protecting my peace was worth more than any additional revenue. My social circle had transformed completely. I'd developed close friendships with several women I'd met through the scholarship fund and support groups, women who understood what it meant to rebuild from family destruction. We had monthly dinners where we laughed about things that would horrify people who hadn't lived through similar experiences. Dark humor among survivors, the kind that outsiders never quite understood. Margaret had become my closest family. We talked several times a week, met for coffee every Sunday, celebrated holidays together with none of the tension that had characterized every family gathering of my childhood. She was the aunt I'd been told was dead, and now she was simply my friend, my ally, my chosen family. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, nothing rushed. I'd learned through therapy that my picker was damaged. Decades of accepting mistreatment had warped my sense of what was normal in relationships. So I dated slowly, cautiously, with clear boundaries and zero tolerance for behavior that resembled my family's patterns. I'd ended things with a man I otherwise liked when he made a joke about me being too sensitive, about something that hurt me. That phrase was a trigger I wouldn't tolerate anymore, not even in jest. But I also wasn't desperate for partnership. I'd learned that I was enough by myself, genuinely enough, not in the self-help affirmation way, but in the deep lived experience of building a life I loved without needing someone else to validate it. If I found someone who added to that life rather than demanding I diminish it, wonderful. If not, I was happy. I practiced yoga 3 mornings a week at a studio where nobody knew my history. I gardened on weekends, my hands in soil, my mind finally quiet enough to notice things like the way morning light hit tomato plants, or how satisfying it felt to pull weeds. I traveled solo to places I'd always wanted to see: a week in Portland, visiting bookstores, a weekend in Santa Fe for art galleries, a hiking trip in Utah where I spent 3 days seeing no one and feeling gloriously alone in the best possible way. I mentored young women in finance through a formal program at work and informally through the networks I'd built. I gave them advice I wish someone had given me at 25. Charge what you're worth. Don't apologize for expertise. Set boundaries early and maintain them firmly, and remember that someone's inability to afford your services is not your emergency to solve by working for free. My life was quiet, intentional, and deeply peaceful. I no longer woke with anxiety about what family crisis would derail my day. I no longer checked my bank account nervously, afraid of mysterious withdrawals. I no longer apologized for taking up space or having needs or expecting basic respect. But maintaining that peace required ongoing vigilance. Boundaries weren't something I set once and forgot about. They were living practices that needed reinforcement. My family still tried occasionally to make contact. Holiday cards arrived addressed in my mother's handwriting. I donated them unopened to a women's shelter, never reading what was inside. My father sent a gift on my birthday this year, the first since the assault, and I returned it marked refused without opening it. Victoria, who'd been released from prison 8 months ago and completed her probation, sent a 10-page letter detailing her recovery journey and asking to meet for coffee. I read Victoria's letter once, recognized it as genuine in its own way, and chose not to respond. She was 29 when she went to prison and was 31 now. She'd lost years to consequences of her own choices. I hoped she was building a better life genuinely. But I didn't need to be part of that life. Her healing journey and mine didn't need to intersect. The hardest boundary to maintain was with extended family who still thought reconciliation was possible or desirable. My father's brother, Uncle Tom, called every few months trying to mediate. "Grace, he's getting older. Don't you want to reconcile before it's too late?" I'd learned to respond calmly without anger. "Uncle Tom, I appreciate your concern, but I've made my choice. I'm not interested in reconciling with someone who systematically abused me for 36 years. Dad's age doesn't change what he did. I hope he finds peace, but he won't find it with me." "But family is everything," Uncle Tom said, using the argument I'd heard 100 times. "Family is behavior, not biology." I replied words I'd said so often they came automatically now. They didn't behave like family. I'm choosing peace over obligation. When my father had a health scare, a mild heart attack that his attorney made sure I knew about, perhaps hoping sympathy would soften my boundaries, I sent a brief message through Elena. "I hope he recovers fully. That doesn't change my decision about contact." I wasn't maintaining distance out of anger anymore. That was the crucial difference. 3 years ago, I'd been furious, rightfully so, at what they'd done to me. The rage had been necessary, had fueled my fight for justice, had given me energy to pursue accountability. But rage was exhausting to maintain, and I'd learned I didn't need it anymore. Now I simply didn't want a relationship with people who'd hurt me. Not out of bitterness, but out of preference. I preferred my quiet life, my chosen family, my peaceful home. I preferred not having people in my life who made me feel small or worthless or obligated. The absence of my family of origin wasn't a wound anymore. It was a relief. Dr. Wu had helped me understand this distinction. Rage-driven estrangement is about punishing them, she'd explained. Peace-driven boundary setting is about protecting yourself. One is exhausting and keeps you emotionally tied to them. The other is sustainable and frees you to build your own life. I still had hard days. Grief ambushed me sometimes, not for the family I had, but for the family I'd never had. I'd see a mother and daughter laughing together at a coffee shop and feel a sharp pang of loss for the relationship I'd always wanted, but would never have. I'd hear friends talk about supportive parents and feel the absence like a phantom limb. But those days grew fewer. And on the hard days, I had tools I hadn't possessed 3 years ago. I called Margaret or one of my friends from the survivor community. I went to therapy. I wrote in my journal. I reminded myself that grieving an unmet need was healthy, not weakness. I occasionally watched the documentary, usually when someone new in my life asked about my story and I wanted them to understand, without having to narrate trauma repeatedly. Each time I watched it, I saw a different woman, me from 2 years ago, still carrying visible pain in her eyes and tension in her shoulders, still in the active phase of legal battles and healing. The woman in that documentary was brave and strong, and I was proud of her. But she wasn't me anymore. I looked healthier now. I'd gained weight in a good way. Softness that came from not being in constant stress mode. I looked more confident, carried myself differently. The pain that had been etched into my expression had transformed into something quieter, not absence of pain, but integration of it. I'd been hurt badly, and I'd survived, and those two truths coexisted now without one canceling out the other. I understood that healing wasn't linear. I had setbacks. I had moments of doubt where I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have given them one more chance. But those moments passed, and I'd returned to the certainty that choosing myself had been right. I didn't regret pursuing justice. Every legal action had been appropriate and necessary. They'd committed crimes and they'd faced legal consequences. That wasn't revenge, it was accountability. But I was also grateful the revenge phase had ended when it did. I could have spent years consumed by bitterness, plotting further ways to hurt them, letting their destruction become my full-time occupation. Instead, I'd enforced consequences and then moved on to building something new. That was the real victory I'd come to understand. Not their punishment, though, that had been necessary, but my freedom from needing to punish them. Not their acknowledgement of wrongdoing, though my mother's letter had provided some closure, but my ability to validate my own reality without their agreement. Not their downfall, though they had fallen, but my rise. I finally understood the greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so completely yourself that their opinion no longer matters. My 39th birthday fell on a Saturday in October, exactly 3 years after the assault that changed everything. I woke in my own home, sunlight streaming through windows I'd chosen in a bed nobody else had opinions about, and felt something I hadn't felt on a birthday in decades anticipation. I'd invited a small group to celebrate Margaret Elena, 3 friends from the survivor community, and 2 colleagues who'd become genuine friends over the past year. 12 people total, all chosen carefully. All people who made me feel seen rather than invisible. Margaret arrived early to help with preparations. We arranged food on my dining table, set out drinks, created a space that felt warm and welcoming. When the cake was delivered, a beautiful creation from a local bakery, Margaret caught my eye and we both laughed. "Are you okay with this?" she asked, gesturing at the cake. "I'm more than okay," I said. "That cake 3 years ago was meant to destroy me. This one is mine. I chose it, I'm sharing it with people I love, and nobody's going to weaponize it." When everyone arrived, the house filled with laughter and conversation that felt genuine, unforced. People asked how I was doing and actually listened to the answer. They shared stories from their own lives, treating me as an equal participant rather than a service provider. The contrast to family gatherings of my past was so stark it was almost dizzying. When it was time for cake, my friend Rebecca, a scholarship recipient who'd become close, brought it out with candles lit. "Should we bring it out?" she asked with a teasing grin. "Or are you nervous?" Everyone laughed, including me. "Bring it on," I said. "But this time I'm in control of who gets a slice." I blew out the candles, and instead of wishing for change, I found myself celebrating what already was. 3 years ago, I'd been surrounded by people who hurt me. Now I was surrounded by people who chose me, who showed up because they wanted to, not because biology obligated them. The transformation was complete. After everyone left, I sat on my porch with Margaret, both of us tired in the good way that comes from hosting people you love. My phone chimed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. The sender was Jennifer Morrison, a name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Thank you for saving my life." I read it aloud to Margaret. "Dear Grace, I'm 52 years old, and last week I finally walked away from my family after 43 years of emotional abuse and financial exploitation. I watched your documentary 6 months ago and recognized myself in your story, the invisible daughter, the family ATM, the one who was told she was too sensitive when she expressed hurt. I always thought leaving would be selfish. Your story showed me that self-preservation isn't selfishness, it's survival. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. I'm in therapy. I'm setting boundaries. I'm building a life that belongs to me. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story. Thank you for showing me it's possible to walk away and survive. No, not just survive, but thrive. You gave me permission to choose myself. I hope you know how many lives you've changed." My hands trembled as I finished reading. Margaret was crying. So was I. "This is why it mattered," Margaret said softly. "Your pain wasn't wasted, Grace. It became a bridge." The scholarship fund had now supported over 100 women in rebuilding their lives after escaping abusive families. The documentary had been viewed over 10 million times. My inbox received messages weekly from women saying variations of, "I thought I was alone," and "You helped me see it wasn't my fault." That night I opened the journal I'd kept throughout this journey and wrote what I knew would be my final entry. 3 years ago today, I was invisible. My family made me believe I existed only to serve others, that my pain didn't matter, that speaking up made me difficult. The birthday assault wasn't the beginning of abuse, it was the moment I finally stopped accepting it. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-respect. That choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. That forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. That family is defined by love and respect, not DNA. That being the difficult one who demands basic human decency is better than being the easy one who accepts cruelty. I'm not grateful for the abuse, but I'm grateful for who I became while fighting it. Someone who knows her worth, who sets boundaries, who refuses to shrink to make others comfortable. To anyone reading this who feels invisible, you are seen. You matter. You deserve better. You have the right to choose yourself, even if others call it selfish. Especially then. The greatest act of defiance isn't burning down what hurt you. It's building something beautiful in spite of it. It's becoming so whole, so completely yourself that their opinion no longer has power over you. You rise when you finally choose yourself. I closed the journal and looked around my home, my sanctuary, my refuge, my evidence that life could be different. Everything I'd fought for was real, tangible mine. That was the day I became whole, and every day since has been mine. Grace's journey shows us that justice isn't just about punishing those who hurt us, it's about reclaiming the power they tried to take away. Her family faced legal consequences, financial ruin, and social exile. But the real victory was Grace becoming whole again. She transformed decades of pain into purpose, helping hundreds of women escape similar abuse through her scholarship fund and advocacy work. The lesson here is profound: you don't owe anyone access to you just because you share DNA. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-respect. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. If Grace's story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share this video. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about courage, justice, and transformation. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had to choose yourself over family obligation? Your story matters, and this community is here to support you.